Hello everybody, it's Trevor from Media Mementos, joined by, who are you again?
Oh, come on.
I'm here with, oh come on, and we're celebrating our 40,000 subscriber special here on Media Mementos.
Yay! 40K, that is a really big milestone.
Thank you, we worked very hard. By the time we're recording this, I think we might have already hit that mark. We've been blowing up a little too quickly to really plan this thing out, so, yeah.
Hey you, it's me! Oh, come on! Just kidding, it's V. We've decided that I'm going to be part of this. I'm really excited. This is technically my first tier maker list that's actually gonna get uploaded, so...
And this is the first one I've done that's not all about Bob Dole and that's not unlisted. We put out a poll not too long ago asking what you'd like to see for the 40K subscriber special, and by a huge landslide, it was determined to be every episode of Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends ranked. And you know what? Sounded like a fun idea, so we decided to make it happen.
And for those of you who may or may not know, even though I have the title of Phantomaniac on this channel, Foster's Home is actually one of my top 3 shows, right behind, you guessed it, Animaniacs and South Park.
Animaniacs 2020, what a great show that totally exists, guys!
There's no Animaniacs reboot/revival in Ba Sing Se.
Huh, you know what, you're right. Whew, man, silly me. Anyways, here's how this video is going to work. We each made our own tier list separately, and then putting them together, we've averaged out each episode placement to make a more balanced or, I guess, more consensus-based list. Here's how this is all going to be organized. First, we have the F tier, which is just bad. Simply put, bad, skip, don't watch, trash. Then we have D. Not great, not terrible, but if you're debating as to whether you should watch them or not, I'd say leaning towards no. Then we have C. This is the average area where the episodes aren't good, they're not bad either, they're just fine. B is good, A is great, and S is reserved for the top 5 episodes of the whole show. Make sense? Great! And if not, you could just go backwards and listen to that again, cause that's all the introduction we're gonna be giving.
Alright, no more beating around the bush. Let's get into it.
Okay, this is every episode of Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends ranked. Voyaging down to the dark depths of the F tier, we have the worst episode of Foster's, at least judging by our consensus. Number 77. I Only Have Surprise for You. Ugh. No, thank you.
I could not have said that any better. So I'll try not to talk too much about this because I think this is very much a popular opinion within the Foster's fandom. So basically, you've got Mac, who hates surprise parties because apparently Blue has been throwing them for him when he was little, and they'd always end up embarrassing him in some way. And then when he suspects that he's at it again, he'll stop at nothing to make sure that the surprise party does not make it past the planning phase.
And that at first sounds like a pretty interesting premise, it's just where they go with it that doesn't work. At least personally speaking, I was never one to really buy into that whole 2010s mentality of, because it's mean-spirited, it has to be terrible. But even then, I've still got my limits. As many of you know from my Drawn Together videos, I'm a pretty big fan of character consistency. I think that in order for a character to be taken seriously or have any sort of staying power or relevance or even level of interest, there have to be certain boundaries in place to make them who they are. For the most part, Foster's is able to keep that in check, but I Only Have Surprise for You seems to mess up not just one character, but every single one.
I could go on forever about how I Only Have Surprise for You is the most out-of-character episode in Foster's history. A lot of people give Blue slack because of how far he goes in humiliating Mac, but you have to remember, it's unfair to single him out because everybody else was in on the plan. Well, except for Eduardo, he had no idea, so he gets a pass. But yeah, you've got Wilt, you've got Coco, you've got Frankie, Mr. Harriman, Madam Foster, even Goo is in this, so all of them are equally terrible.
Even if mean-spirited stuff is right up your alley, the jokes here, well, I'll be honest, they suck. In fact, I can't even spot half of them. I'm not sure what's trying to be funny, what's trying to be serious. Everything feels so flat. Except, of course, for the Earth Day joke. That gets me every time.
And then for me, the only scene that I actually like from this episode is when Blue bursts into the bedroom asking Goo and Coco if Mac has arrived yet, and he says,
I'll check the hall. If you hear anything, you yell, okay?
and then after he hears both of their muffled protests from down the hall, he immediately runs to the room and he takes out a Nerf gun, points it at Mac, and then shoots it to protect them. It's a really good moment that I wish could have been in a better episode.
To wrap up here, I have to say that, honestly, I Only Have Surprise for You is the only episode of Foster's that I think doesn't stand out in any way. Even when you're talking about cruelty, that carries over to a couple other episodes we're going to be talking about. Like, I don't know. Number 76, Pranks for Nothing. An episode that I absolutely remembered to put on this list. I didn't have to be reminded by V as to what this thing even was. I promise.
Oh man, I hate this episode. As much as I Only Have Surprise for You, except the only difference between them is that I'd rather watch Blue get tortured for half an hour instead of Blue torturing Mac for half an hour, which should not be something that I have to say considering Blue is my favorite character. And of course, it does not make Pranks for Nothing any better. So basically, the group goes to a hotel because termites have infested Foster's, and Wilt, Ed, and Coco just want to relax while Blue wants to go have his own shenanigans around the hotel while trying not to break any rules. But then one whole pot of coffee is downed, he loses all of his impulse control just like Mac does when he has sugar. So then Wilt, Ed, and Coco pull a prank on Blue by drenching him in cold water, which would have been fine until Mr. Harriman comes in, thinks Blue made the mess himself.
Ew!
Me? You've been nothing but a thorn in my side.
Blue tries to prove his innocence, but then room service comes, and then Mr. Harriman locks him in the closet. That is just, wow, that's awful, but it's also not as awful as the rest of the episode. It's basically just Blue getting tortured by his friends for half an hour, and yeah, even as a kid, I never liked it.
As a kid, I never even saw it. I kinda stopped watching the show after Good Will Hunting came out. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not because I thought that the show got bad or anything, I just couldn't find the episodes when they came on. I think the only one I caught after that on its first airing was Destination Imagination, and we'll be talking about that towards the end, don't you worry. But after seeing some of the episodes of Season 6 that I missed, I can kinda see why this is the last season. It's a lot louder, it's a lot meaner, it's a lot angrier, and like I said in I Only Have Surprise for You, that stuff doesn't normally bother me, but when that's the entire show, and when most of your jokes revolve around characters being mean to other people, especially in a show that, essentially, at the beginning, prioritized its character growth and community above everything else, it just feels like we're going backwards, you know? And this one's the biggest example of that I could find.
And then, of course, I'll try not to dwell on this too long because I did make a 2-hour character analysis video where this is the main focus.
Go watch it.
If you enjoy Blue and you have slightly more sympathy or empathy for him, Season 6 is basically the definition of hopeless, because it really does feel that Blue was put in a terrible situation from the start, where maybe it wasn't terrible at first, but it was pretty bad when you think about it, and then it just got worse and worse and worse, and Pranks for Nothing is one of the final nails in the coffin that basically solidifies for me that Blue is never going to get out of that situation. Like, he's just a kid. Do you really think it's fair to lock him in a closet and then force him to spend the entire night up until it's time to go, cleaning up the entire hotel just because he's scared that he's going to be punished severely by Mr. Harriman, and then daring to laugh at him as he's pretty much on his knees on the verge of tears screaming, please, 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 don't punish me, I'm trying. It's just really cruel.
But he's not a kid, remember? He said so, and Frankie, my dear. Therefore, it's okay. But in all seriousness, yeah, this one just doesn't do it for me either. For me, the big problem here is that, really, Blue doesn't do anything to deserve what he's going through. There are episodes like Bust the Two of Us or Cookie Dough, or technically speaking even Busted in a sense, where he does warrant at least some level of punishment, but the inciting incident here isn't his fault, and that kinda sets the mood for this whole thing. And trust me, we could talk way more about these 2 episodes, but there's 5 more bad ones we need to address. Such as, number 75, Foster's Goes to Europe. Wait, isn't this one a fan favorite? Doesn't everybody love this one? Hey everybody, please put in the comments just how much you love Foster's Goes to Europe, because I'm sure I'm right.
Foster's Goes to Europe is a very interesting case for me. It feels like the setup is really good. Imagine, everybody goes to a new location for one episode, and it's Europe. Which, okay, let's be honest, Europe is not one location, it's just a whole group of countries, but this is 2000s kids media. It's not like they're gonna just say Foster's Goes to China and France and Italy and blah blah blah.
Wait, China's in Europe now? Huh. Should probably watch the news more.
Yeah, you really should. Otherwise, you'd know that Singapore is in Wisconsin.
Well, come on, everybody knows that. It's right next to Manitowoc County.
Anyway, the thing that gets me about this episode is that there's so much potential, but they don't really do anything with it. It's just them stressing about the trip, and then never actually getting to go on the trip with Mac being blamed for it.
I could see where the potential for jokes are, especially since, let's face it, we've all been there before. Our family is trying to get ready for some vacation, there's every little thing going wrong that's keeping us from going out the door, but that's it, it's just kind of played straight. Characters are going, then they're not going, some of them are making a schedule, some of them are Eurotrish. The whole thing just feels like a bunch of setup with no real payoff, or even really cartoony exaggeration.
And it's very much one of the biggest nothing burgers of the show. Although I'm surprised that this episode didn't completely tarnish Madame Foster's reputation, considering many fans, including myself, consider her stealing the tickets from Mac to be her lowest point.
Also, I just feel bad for Eurotrish. I can see the joke, I just feel bad for her though.
Yeah, she's not really trying to do anything bad, she's just, I don't know, I just feel sad for her.
Speaking of feeling sad, number 74, Imposter's Home for Make 'em Up Pals. One that, for the longest time, I actually considered a favorite. To be fair, I hadn't seen it since I was like 10, so when I heard a bunch of people on the YouTubes, as it were, talking about how this is one of the worst things ever, I was confused. The episode with Goofball McGee, the human who's pretending to be an imaginary friend that only Frankie can spot, that's the bad episode? But, yeah, after watching it again, well, it's in F tier for a reason.
Okay, I'll admit, I do have a slightly altered opinion on Imposter's Home because of the history behind it. Originally, this was not supposed to be the plan for the episode. They were supposed to have Goofball McGee actually be a real human instead of an imaginary friend. However, I still really much do not like it. I think this is the ultimate Frankie torture episode as well. Maybe it would have been worth it if she actually got a happy ending, but as it stands, she of course gets screwed over.
On my end, after revisiting it, I remembered the jokes being a lot funnier and a lot wilder when I was a kid. All it really is here is, Goofball says something stupid, Frankie tries to catch him on it, Goofball tries to play it off as being legitimate, and then the friends all believe him and rinse and repeat until, surprise, surprise, everything at the end was actually true. Haha, ah, ha, 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 ha. Yeah, the jokes are just about as lame as that laugh. Number 73, Ticket to Rod. Another one I definitely remembered before making this list.
Oh boy. So remember how in Pranks for Nothing I said that it really hammered in the hopelessness of Blue's situation? Ticket to Rod is one of the first final nails in the final nails of the coffin, if that makes any sense.
No, but go on.
At the end of season 5, you have 3 episodes back to back. Ticket to Rod, Nightmare on Wilson Way, and Better Off Ed. They have a common theme within them, which is where Blue gets screwed over even though he hasn't really done anything bad in the episode.
I can't be good. I can't be bad. That woman has rendered me completely powerless.
But having them back to back to back does retroactively make Ticket to Rod worse. I guess it could have been a C-tier episode at best if it wasn't for that, but I still think it goes too far. Especially with Frankie actually being unlikable for once, because Mac and Blue are trying to get tickets to see this really cool action star, Rod Tango, in his new movie. But when Blue has to use the bathroom after listening to the radio station that's giving away the free tickets, Frankie takes his place begrudgingly, gets the question right, wins the tickets, and then insists that she takes away one of them from the boys. And it's no surprise which one she takes it away from.
Blue, if this is how you're gonna act at the movies, you know what? You made up my mind. Mac, would you like to go to the movies with me tomorrow?
Damn, that is harsh.
For me, I just don't really get where they're going. It feels like they wanted to make an episode where they try to sneak into a movie, or they try to wait for tickets for a movie, or they try to participate in a phone contest. Having 3 episodes stapled together may be a bargain, but that doesn't mean it's an objectively good product. Ticket to Rod feels a bit uneven, unpleasant, and just flat. I don't see attempts to tell jokes, period, let alone having ones that don't land.
And of course, I am not a Blue apologist. I am a Blue sympathizer. So I'm fine when Blue gets his just desserts, but I draw the line whenever it goes too far, especially when he hasn't done anything wrong, like in this episode, and in Pranks for Nothing, but we already discussed that one.
Right, but how's about a new type of bad? One we haven't discussed before. Number 72, Better Off Ed. I think this one could have worked if they just gave it one more draft. Here's the story. Eduardo is helping out in the Foster's nursery, and he tells all these tall tales about what a cool guy and radical adventurer he is. But uh-oh, one of the nursery members is now in the house. So it's up to Eduardo to keep the lie going and prevent the kid from having his hopes crushed. Sounds like a pretty good story, doesn't it? Well, yes it does. Too bad that the writing didn't catch up.
Remember how I said in the last segment that Ticket to Rod is part of a 3-hit combo of episodes that really hammers in Blue's hopeless situation? Well, this is the final episode in that 3-hit combo. Better Off Ed, of course, has Blue be the butt monkey of the episode. Blue is trying to convince everybody to play paintball with him while Frankie and Mr. Harriman are out, but they all say no because they think they're going to get in trouble, despite Blue's foolproof plan of making sure that they do every single thing just right. So that way they can have a good time but not worry about the consequences. And then it starts to devolve quickly when Scrappy, the nursery friend that graduates from the nursery, finds Blue and basically bullies him because Eduardo made Blue look like a complete coward. And then, of course, all of the nursery babies start bullying him, and then they have their paintball tournament, and no matter what Blue does, he gets severely punished for it. When Ed finally confesses his lie, everybody still hates Blue because
He sure is a doodle head.
I know.
meanwhile, after Eduardo's lie is revealed, they see that he's not this super cool awesome friend, but he's this super nice imaginary friend. And that just, I don't know, it almost feels like the nursery babies get away with bullying Blue, which I feel like this lesson could really hurt them developmentally, and it only furthers how Blue is never going to be good enough for anybody.
Better Off Ed kind of feels like how many people used to think that I'm With Stupid from SpongeBob was. Just a bunch of nastiness and, I hate using this term, but mean-spirited nature all throughout. And remember how I said earlier that one more draft would have made a difference? Well, here's what I'm thinking. Have Blue in on it the whole time. Maybe Eduardo cuts him a deal, kind of like what happens in Setting a Precedent when Mr. Harriman comes up to Blue and bribes him into helping out with his campaign. Something along the lines of that. So Blue plays along, takes some of the punishment, and the joke can either be he's trying to repress all this anger he's feeling because there's something really good on the line, or he's just so bad at what he's doing, but the kids are too little to really question it. I think that would have been great. But no, we get this. An episode with one joke, and let's be real, just a handful of scenes that they repeat over and over. Honestly, this could have been another one of those 11-minute episodes, but uh-oh, it came too late in the run. What a shame.
And what a shame that your version of the episode is not the canon one. Although I will say, the latter idea does kind of remind me of how Craig wants to take Blue's direction in Foster's Imaginary Nursery.
Could you do a show about teaching kids how to do things correctly by showing an older character screw up? And we're like, well, Blue's perfect for that, right? He's an idiot.
So, fingers crossed that when that eventually comes out, Blue and the nursery friends will be on a lot better terms.
Yep, here's hoping. Number 71. Cheese a Go-Go. I hate it, I hate it, I hate it, I hate it, I hate it. And I also hate the fact that this is this high up on F tier. If it was up to me, oh gosh, either right before or right after I Only Have Surprise for You. But someone had to compromise with me, and, well, we couldn't put it at the bottom of C tier, could we?
Guilty as charged. Okay, so with Cheese a Go-Go, I actually don't like it that much better than Trevor does. It's also one of those Nothing Burger episodes, but in a way, it feels like it almost works, but there's something holding it back.
Almost works? What are you talking about?
So I'm going to admit, I understand why a lot of people are annoyed by Cheese, but personally he doesn't bother me that much. And I also highly understand why one of his worst moments, according to a lot of people, is him constantly yelling, gotta go, gotta go, gotta go, gotta go, gotta go. But for me, I don't know, there's something about it that scratches that repetitive itch in my brain just right. So I have a higher tolerance for that.
Well, I'm glad you could like it. Can't say the same for myself. This is the plot of the episode. Cheese screams, gotta go, gotta go, gotta go, gotta go, gotta go, over and over again. Frankie is trying to do a bunch of menial chores outside of the house. Eduardo's doped up on laughing gas, and Blue thinks that Cheese is calling to aliens for some reason. Okay, let's talk about the elephant in the room here. This was the kickoff to the infamous Cartoon Network Invaded event, an event that didn't exactly pan out the best. For more information, please see this video here. And I gotta say, even though most of the episodes created for this event weren't necessarily the best, this one is the only one I can say is legitimately bad. And it's bad, really bad. The whole thing, it really is just Cheese screaming, gotta go, Blue doing stupid stuff, Eduardo saying non sequiturs, and Frankie being stressed. Now, I'll admit, I'm not the biggest fan of Cheese. Yes, I know, you can boo all you like. My opinion's not gonna change. Don't get me wrong, I think the little guy is pretty charming in his own right, but a little bit of cheese goes a long, long way, much like cheddar cheese itself. I'll talk a little bit more about what I think makes a good cheese moment when we get to Mac Daddy, but as for this, it's the worst of the worst. Cheese isn't bouncing off anybody, he's just screaming and saying the same thing over and over again. And because that's such a big focus in this episode, they don't try to tell very many other jokes. And even when they do, you know that it's either going to be surrounded by or is about to be interrupted by gotta go, gotta go, gotta go. And there's no payoff either. When we get to the end of the episode, we find out that, get this, the reason he's been screaming gotta go, gotta go, gotta go is because sometimes he just has to go. Kill me.
Elaborating a little more on how it almost works, I feel like if you dropped Eduardo's laughing gas plot and Frankie's plot with being overstressed and also kind of helping with some kind of court case over a sandwich of all things.
Good old Jackie Cones.
Right. If they just kept the focus on Blue trying to figure out what's up with Cheese, why he's constantly yelling, gotta go, gotta go, gotta go, gotta go, gotta go, and also trying to see if it's true that he's an alien, it could have been like a spiritual sequel to Blue Done It, where something similar happens, except it plays out a lot different and it's a lot better.
But we didn't get that now, did we?
Nope. No, we did not.
Well then, that's enough of F tier, so let's go on to D tier, starting with number 70. The Little Peas. I have to say it like that because that's how it's spelled on the title card. So, this episode is just the big cheese, but from an outsider's perspective. And no, I'm not saying it's from the perspective of someone who doesn't like or hasn't seen Foster's. I'm talking about a made-up character who's just there in the house throughout the events of the episode and nothing really happens. The bulk of the jokes are just, hey, remember this part from the episode? Remember that part? Well, here's the same thing from another angle with a guy who sounds like an annoying version of Mickey Mouse. Hope you like it.
So, just to get one thing out of the way, I've heard some people say that the only reason The Little Peas was made was because of a writer's strike. However, the strike began on November 5th, 2007, and the episode aired on November 22nd, 2007. So it had been in production before the writer's strike even happened. Thank you for clearing that up, Peter the Pokey and John Marquis, 1995. Little Peas really has no excuse to be yet another Nothing Burger episode.
I mean, I hate to pat myself on the back, but I think I put it nicely when I said, it's the big cheese, but again, and worse. And with an annoying main character who we never see again.
Psych!
Let me ask, do Foster's fans generally like this one? Cause I remember when I was a Ben the Looney fan, he talked a lot of trash about it, so kinda got me thinking sense.
I know a couple people seem interested in Peas as a character, probably because of his concept, with him being so small in a house full of really big or average-sized imaginary friends, but outside of concept, I don't really think there's that much to him. And of course, it should also be noted that The Little Peas is one of the only 2 Foster's episodes that has me bored, so that is not a good look whatsoever.
And I think I know what one of those other ones is. Number 68 plus 1, Say It Isn't So. I can describe the entire episode right here. Foster's is going to a field trip to an amusement park. There's a buddy system. Blue is partnered with Madam Foster. Madam Foster has errands to run. Blue is bored on said errands. And that's it. Nothing else really happens. It's the exact opposite problem of the Jimmy Neutron episode, The Great Egg Heist, where that one was too short to have anything land. This one is way too long.
Okay, slight correction. Mac and Blue are actually paired up, but then Blue ditches Mac to go ride in Madam Foster's Firebird because that car, oh boy, it has a lot of gas. So you can kind of see where the episode is coming from by deciding to punish Blue for another 30 minutes. Of course, it doesn't feel as awful as, per se, Pranks for Nothing, Ticket to Rod, or Better Off Ed, but the problem is that it's way too long, like Trevor said. If this was only one of the 15-minute episodes, like what we briefly got in Season 2 and Season 1, then I feel like it could have been at least C tier. But nope, the premise gets old after the first 10 minutes. Although I will say I do love the way Blue escapes from Madam Foster when she tries to keep him trapped in the store as her accountability buddy. It's a rare show of creativity from Blue that was kind of common in the earlier seasons, but by this point you don't really get to see it anymore, so it was at least refreshing for me.
Here's a pro tip for any writer out there. If you're gonna have an episode that's all about a character being bored, make sure the audience isn't bored right alongside them, okay? Alright, number 68. You all knew this one was coming, though probably a bit lower. Everybody knows it's Bendy. Do we even need to summarize this one? Everyone knows this episode and its reputation.
I hope you die in a fire.
Everyone knows it's bendy, and everyone knows it's widely hated. But what everyone probably doesn't know is that it has the advantage of being only 15 minutes long. Apparently it was supposed to be a full 30 minutes, but Cartoon Network said no and had them shorten it to 15. So if it got the long run, who knows if it actually could have been saved? I guess we'll never know.
As it stands, it's another one of those episodes that tells the same joke over and over, and the joke isn't particularly interesting or funny, and they don't vary it all too much until the end, but I don't know, a lot of people seem to hate this one because it's mean and all that, but have you heard some of the other ones we had on this list? They're even worse. I guess this one got the reputation it got because it came first?
And of course, to play the devil's advocate, I do see why it's so vitriolically hated. Mr. Harriman and Frankie were really out of character. Harriman I can kind of believe if he puts Bendy above everybody else, but not Frankie. I mean, I guess you could kind of see why they'd believe Bendy over Blue, but you also have to suspend your disbelief enough to think that it's fair for them to believe Bendy over Coco, Eduardo, and Wilt. Like, especially Wilt. It doesn't make sense that he gets framed for some of Bendy's pranks, so it really does ruin the immersion. And then, of course, I do think with a couple of rewrites, it also could have worked in its proper format. But if Bendy actually gets punished in the end, instead of Blue having to take the fall for another one of Bendy's pranks that I guess is also kind of Blue's fault, but not really because he was trying to expose him, so, yeah.
Yeah, everybody knows it's Bendy. Everybody knows it's bad. Lauren Faust even had to apologize for it. And yeah, we think it's bad, just not that bad. I mean, have you seen Cheese A Go-Go? I'm sorry. Still on that. Number 67. Where there's a Wilt, there's a way. Hey, it's the companion episode of the last one. That's not a good sign. Something tells me that back in the days where you could buy episodes on iTunes, this one wasn't exactly the most popular pick.
When there's a Wilt, there's a way has so much going on for it, but also so little. Basically, Wilt is trying to watch a basketball game and Blue asks him to go get some potato chips. But as he goes to get the chips, he ends up doing a lot of favors for other imaginary friends and eventually out of the house, and it spirals into one big snowball effect that actually, now that I think of it, it could have worked if it was actually kind of interesting. A lot of people would probably call this a Wilt torture episode, and they wouldn't be wrong, but I think it's very telling when the Wilt torture episode is nowhere near as bad as Max, Frankie's, or the many ones that Blue has.
This is another one where we had to compromise because whereas V likes Cheese A Go-Go more than I do, I think this one's actually okay. In my original list, I think I put it towards the bottom of C tier because I get where they're going with it. It's just kinda simple. I think the jokes are okay, the concept is kind of fun, the situations can be a bit inventive, and I'm really glad this wasn't a half-hour long episode because if it was, they'd be running on fumes, but as it stands, I don't super get the hate for this one. It's a bit simple, yes, but bad? I mean, I could concede to it. That's why it's here in D tier after all. But for me personally, it's alright. Wouldn't go out of my way to see it, but I won't avoid it either. Number 66, Read 'em and Weep. Now, okay, this one, I just have nothing to say about it. I just think it's weak, and that's about it. So, V, have fun.
Okay.
I don't really have that much to say about it either, but I do have enough. I do think that parts of it could have worked, but in execution, something about it just feels off. Basically, the gist of it is that a bunch of imaginary friends get adopted, Blue is trying to cope with the loss of Eduardo, and Fluffernutter is especially heartbroken because one of her bandmates got adopted, and most importantly, her boyfriend got adopted. And to make things worse, he's sending in a lot of tapes where it's revealed that he was adopted by some middle-aged woman with some cat that really hates him, which idea alone, that is actually pretty funny. But a lot of it just doesn't stick the landing. It does have one really good moment when the group thinks that Eduardo was shot by hunters and Blue immediately bursts into tears, crying about how nobody could ever replace him, and it really shows how much he really values his friends. But yeah, as it stands, as a whole, Read 'em and Weep has parts that kind of work, one that actually does work, but when you put it together, it just doesn't hit the same.
And that's all I have to say about that.
Number 65, A Lost Clause. Another compromise one here, so let's see what V has to say before I butt in.
A Lost Clause is also one of those weird mixed bags. On the one hand, I do appreciate a lot of the good that's within it, such as the Peanuts-esque score, and the overall plot is really nice, with Mac doubting his belief in Santa, and Blue tries to help him, but he also has his own subplot where he tries to convince Harriman to give everybody more than one present, only for it to backfire terribly. But I think what really hurts the episode is the ending. Basically, everybody at Foster's gets all the gifts that they want, while Blue is stuck with nothing but coal after he accidentally convinces Mr. Harriman to revoke everybody's presents. Now, on the one hand, I understand why this happened because, Blue is a naughty kid. And of course, as Max said,
The real Santa Claus would never give someone as naughty as you anything but coal. It's undeniable proof. Woohoo!
However, in the grand scheme of things, this is actually a really sad and messed up ending. Blue's situation with his friends is a lot more toxic than it seems, and plot twist, he's not the toxic one. One of the comments that I got, elaborating on this part of the episode, makes a very good point about how Terrence does not get any coal, but Blue does. So you'd have to assume that Santa is biased by punishing Blue while letting the big brother bully get away, and of course how Blue is not even good enough for him while everybody else who's contributed to Blue's downward spiral across the series completely gets away with it.
Yeah, that's actually a pretty good point. I never really thought about it that way, but, like I've said, bad endings and all that don't normally get me all that much. And I will say, in this episode's defense, I don't think Blue's getting the coal just because of what he did here. He's done a lot of bad things up until this point, so I think it's finally him getting his just desserts. But, again, here's the major exception here. Blue, most of the time, does learn from his mistakes. So, kind of like what she was saying, are we gonna punish Blue but not Terrence, who never reforms? But even that aside, the episode for me is okay. It's just perfectly average. It does the humor average, it does the story average. The concept is pretty good, but a concept alone can't make the episode worthwhile. I'll admit that I watch this one from time to time every few years, but it's never a Christmas special where I'm like, oh yeah, I gotta see Lost Clause. That is a classic.
So of course, that's why it's so low on the list.
Number 64, Jackie Cones in the Case of the really long title that I'm not gonna read.
Jackie Cones in the Case of the Overdue Library Crook.
Wow, it wasn't that long after all. Stupid tier maker and having your things impossible to read. Okay, so this is another perfect example of just because a character is a fan favorite doesn't mean they should have their own episode, because sometimes they don't really work. I love Jackie Cones. I think he's a great background character, but he is not strong enough to carry his own 22 minutes.
So the whole episode is about Mac trying to find out who used his library card and checked out a book overdue, because he certainly didn't do it. Somebody took it from him. So of course he enlists Jackie Cones' help to look for the, you guessed it, overdue library crook. I will admit, the premise is kind of fun, since it's a lot like the alien subplot of Cheeseagogo or Blue Done It, but this one is also very much nothing to me. It doesn't do anything. This is the other episode that I mentioned in the little piece that had me completely bored. And I think where it falls flat the most is that Mac and Jackie don't really have that much chemistry to me. If this was a Mac and Blue episode, maybe. If Jackie Cones had somebody else to banter with, or if Mac had somebody else, of course, then maybe this could have worked. But as it stands, it just doesn't have enough to pick itself up from being good on paper.
Sorry, Jackie. I'm so sorry. Number 63, Beat with a Shtick.
So, Beat with a Shtick. Not a bad premise, but I also kind of feel like it would have benefited from being 15 minutes, and as much as I don't like to say the term when it comes to Fosters because of the misconceptions, if it was less mean-spirited. Blue starts the episode by having a roast-off with everybody, and it's all in good fun, until he says, "How's the weather up there?" to this imaginary friend who is absolutely massive, and he basically seems to threaten Blue with a fight, and then everybody turns against him, either betting against him or telling him that he's about to get what he deserves. Wilt. Yeah, I have to admit, I really do not like Wilt in this episode. It's one thing for him to snap because out of all characters, he deserves it the most, but him snapping at Blue and telling him that he deserves to get beaten, hospitalized, or even murdered over something so harmless really does not put him in a good light.
Over on my side of things, my main issue with this one is, again, it's too long. The build-up scenes are all kind of the same, and I think after Eduardo, we kinda get what's happening. We get the joke, we understand the setup, no need to keep talking about it, okay? Oh, no, they're still going, okay? And yes, the joke at the end is funny. The giant imaginary friend Brute thing wants to be a comedian just like Blue, so that gets a good laugh, but it sure took a long time to get here.
But even that's not enough to save the episode, because he punches Blue into the ground anyway, and nobody cares.
Just for a minute, could you just stop, please?
I don't think this one's nearly as bad as V does, but personally, it's not necessarily a favorite. I don't know, I could go either way on it, so yeah, D tier it is. Let's move on to C tier, starting with number 62, Goodbye to Blue. What a sorry series finale. I get it, it's popular to rip on this thing because it's a bad ending to this awesome show, but even when you look at this episode outside of that context, it's just so flat. Not helping is that it's a ripoff of one of the show's better episodes, Bride to Beat.
Rip-off artist! Ow!
Only this time, Blue doesn't think that Mac is getting married, he thinks that Mac is moving away. So everyone at Foster's is trying to help Mac have a great final day, all while Blue is trying to come up with a last great memory for him and Mac, but he accidentally keeps recreating old episodes of the show. Haha, callback.
I will say, one positive that Goodbye to Blue has when you're trying to contrast it with the Bride to Beat is that in my opinion, it is different enough. While yes, the plot stems from a misunderstanding, this time everybody misunderstands, not just Blue. And in a way, compared to the Bride to Beat, they basically already know the truth, except they just placed it on the wrong person, in which they thought Mac was moving away when it's actually Louise.
Right, yeah, because instead of Mac leaving, it's Cheese coming in. Great.
And I think that what hurts Goodbye to Blue the most is that it's the series finale. It would have worked a lot better if it was a season finale, especially with Cheese moving in and whatnot. But to end the entire show like this, not counting that hauntingly beautiful last scene where the house unravels because of the theme song going away in reverse, and of course that picture at the end saying, "Thank you for watching," autographed by Craig and Lauren, that was really sweet. But even those two can't really save this from being a bad ending to the show entirely.
Also, it's ironic that I keep repeating myself over and over by saying that these episodes' worst faults so far have been that they've been repetitive, but here we go again. It's the same scene over and over. Our friend is doing something with Mac, Blue comes in with a callback, Mac says, "We already did that," and then, next scene. And it's just that all the way until the end when, uh-oh, misunderstanding, here comes Cheese. The end, goodbye, please watch Destroy Build Destroy.
Oh, deep cut.
Number 61, Let Your Hair Down.
This one is an episode that almost works, but there's so much holding it back. So this is one of the many Foster's episodes that surrounds Mr. Harriman and how he's too strict. we have to change that. But this one is, of course, different from the others. Because, for once, Mr. Harriman actually does let his hair down. And of course he becomes relaxed and chill, and it's actually surprising how Blue of all people is able to get him to do that, considering those two, they're kind of like enemies with mutual respect somehow. But there's also a lot of other factors that you have to take in that bogs the episode down. I feel like after Harriman lets his hair down, we focus a lot on the other main characters as they see everything go to waste.
What are you doing?
Streaking!
What are you talking about? You don't wear clothes to begin with.
And I never will!
But when you have just Mac, Frankie, Wilt, Eduardo, Coco, and nobody else bantering with each other, it's not as strong compared to when Blue's in the mix, because he's the interesting one of the group. He's the one that breathes new life into them, when otherwise, without him, the group is just kind of bland and boring because nothing ever really happens with them, unless they have their instigator. And of course you also have the ending where Mr. Harriman completely reverts back to his old ways and he doesn't get to compromise anything. Yay.
For me, I feel like they don't go far enough. Kinda like what V was saying, it's just a lot of the Foster's gang when really we should be focusing on Harriman because this will be the one time he's ever gonna be Harry, so we'd better enjoy him while we can, and we don't really get to. The stuff with Harry's pretty good, but the times where he's not in it just feels like any other episode of the show, which means it's comfortably sitting here in C tier.
I will say though, in Let Your Hair Down's defense, it does have a few notable moments. Most specifically, Harry calling Frankie Frankenfurter, which highly amuses the Rocky Horror Picture Show fan in me. And, most importantly, this is the only time in the entire show where Blue is actually able to hit his paddle ball. It's such a satisfying conclusion to that running gag, even though it still happens next season, but still, it's a miracle it happened.
Number 60, Blue Tube. It's a rainy day at the Foster's house, and that's too bad because they were gonna go on a field trip to Monsoon Lagoon, which is a giant water park that everybody's looking forward to going to, especially Blue. While everybody else is able to find ways to entertain themselves during the rainy day, Blue cannot, and he's even hosting a funeral for their field trip to Monsoon Lagoon. Everybody finds out that they can make ViewTube videos to help pass the time, and they make a contest about it. But Blue, again, is too focused on going to the water park to have any fun, and then hijinks kind of ensue. Things kind of happen in this episode. It is pretty neat to see some of the creativity that the Foster's gang comes up with, especially that Mothra Coco thing. That was a lot of fun, but to me, this whole thing's getting dragged down because of Blue. He's complaining constantly, and I'm not a Blue apologist like V is.
I'm not a Blue apologist, I'm a sympathizer.
I'm not a Blue apologist like V is.
Oh, screw you.
So the way I see it, Blue is kind of, how do I put this, a bad improv partner who doesn't follow yes and. So he'll go on stage and his partners are saying, look, here comes Mothra, and he'll go, no, water park. It kind of kills some of the flow, especially since the rest of this episode has a lot of potential. It's just paying so much attention to Blue that, to me, the premise doesn't seem to be fully realized. Now let's hear what V has to say.
I do agree that BlueTube has a lot of missed potential. However, my reasoning is slightly different. So I may have forgotten to mention this in the Pranks for Nothing segment, but the way I would have fixed that episode was instead of Mr. Harriman punishing Blue, throwing him in the closet, and then him getting into this prank war that's not really a war, it's just everybody predicting their opponent's move and then immediately beating them to the punch. I would have fixed that one by having them have a squeeze the day kind of plot, where after Blue snaps out of his coffee frenzy, they run around together in the hotel and try to have as much fun as they can before it's time to go. I'd apply a similar concept to BlueTube, except not changing everything that drastically. I think the reason Blue acts out in that episode is because by this point, the big things don't matter to anybody anymore. So he has to hold on to what little things he has left, but even then, nobody will let him have it. So if they were able to play along for just a little bit with the funeral that he threw for their trip, then I'm pretty sure that Blue would have actually cheered up and then joined everybody in making their viral videos, even making his goal for the episode to make the best viral video that anyone at Foster's could ever make. And I feel like that would have been a really positive spin on the episode proper. But no, that's not what we got. Instead, we got Blue building a water slide and accidentally ruining some other friends' videos, and then breaking every single bone in his body, which is actually the most surprising thing about the episode, because how the heck does a blob have a skeleton? But yeah, it just makes me sad.
And that's the best way I can describe BlueTube. It's sad because it could have been so much better, but as it is, it's not bad, but it's not quite good yet. Just needed one more push, or a roll of duct tape over Blue's mouth. Either way, something had to be done. Number 59, Land of the Flea.
Land of the Flea is a really interesting episode. Eduardo gets fleas from his imaginary pet dog Chewy. He allows them to stay on his fur because the fleas are a couple named Juan and Juanita. Next thing he knows, the fleas end up creating their entire civilization all over his body. He's in immense discomfort, but he doesn't want to hurt the fleas. However, Harriman and Frankie realize what's going on, and they're trying to get rid of his fleas. Meanwhile, Blue gets really jealous of Ed for having all of these fleas, and Mac explains to him, "Fleas need fur! Duh!" So he schemes to shave Eduardo's fur off in the middle of the night and steal his fleas.
I like this episode overall. It has a nice amount of Blue being bad, but not too bad. And of course, Eduardo being my favorite character. Obviously, I'm gonna like this episode a little bit. But what I like to see here is not Eduardo being a coward or acting like a little kid. It's Eduardo genuinely being a sweet person, and, well, let's be real, that's why he was imagined. Remember in Good Will Hunting, where his creator says that she created him to ward off all the bullies and bad guys in her life? But she also wanted him to be a sweet and sensitive friend? Well, here's Eduardo showing that off on full display. I wouldn't say it's anything stellar, but it's sweet, you know?
Another thing that stands out to me from this episode is how they reveal that the fleas are imaginary, which is why Harriman and Frankie don't dispose of them in the end. This intrigues me because, as we see in episodes like The Big Picture, it's an unspoken rule that imaginary friends don't age. However, the imaginary fleas are a big exception, because we see Juan and Juanita have their kids, and then we see them grow up and have more kids and more, like I said, to create the entire population on his fur. So this does present the idea that some imaginary friends can be loopholes to that aging rule. However, the reason I only consider it okay despite it all is because looking back on it, it kind of grosses me out whenever Eduardo's fur jiggles when the fleas are irritating him. It just doesn't sit right with me.
I can kind of see where you're coming from on that. Personally, it doesn't bother me so much. It's just, well, compared to everything else we're gonna get later, especially in the B, A, and S ranks, I don't know, it just doesn't really belong in B, A, or S, so here it is in C. That's kinda how this works, in case you can't tell. Number 58, Sight for Sore Eyes. This is the episode with Pleakley, and that's kind of all I have to say. That, and also, how many times do they say the word ditch in this one? I swear, it's lost all meaning at this point. It's an overall charming episode where Mac and Blue are trying to help a lost imaginary friend find his blind owner. Insert Stevie Wonder joke here. And that's not just me saying that, by the way. This friend's creator is a young Stevie Wonder. Huh. Okay. Then there's a whole bunch of misunderstandings going around, with Mac thinking that Blue and the friend ditched him, or the rest of the Foster's gang thinking that Mac ditched Blue, the friend thinking that he was ditched by everybody. Ditch, 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 ditch.
Sight for Sore Eyes is one of the 15-minute episodes that I consider to be in the better half. I think what really makes this episode good in comparison to the bottom three is how frantic it feels. Of course, it's a given, considering Ivan is very neurotic and he's shouting, "Stevie! Where's Stevie?" like every 5 seconds.
Yeah, that doesn't get old. Much like the word ditched.
Well, hey, like I said, I have a higher tolerance for this kind of stuff. I do think one interesting thing that I'd like to point out here is that I think this is the first moment in the entire show where I really feel that the friends go too far with their treatment of Blue. See, in the beginning, they're playing hide and seek and Blue is the seeker. But then he gets distracted because Mac comes to visit, and then he gets involved in this whole adventure with trying to reunite Ivan with Stevie. And then Wilt, Eduardo, and Coco think Blue ditched them, and then they find him beat up in a dumpster because of some other misconception happening with the guy that he thinks is Stevie, but actually isn't, and his big brother beating him up or something. But yeah, he's laying there in the dumpster, all banged up and dirty and disoriented, and they just keep grilling the heck out of him.
We were waiting in that closet for ages. One very scary dark closet, stupido.
Oh my gosh, what are you doing?
Until one of them realizes that maybe it's because Mac didn't show up today, and that's why he's saying, "Gotta find him." Of course, I'm a little bit softer on them in this scenario since they do kind of apologize, although this is under false pretenses, so it's not really a valid apology, but it's better than the whole lot of nothing the rest of the show gives us, so I'll take it at this point.
The jokes revolve around one of three things: a misunderstanding, the word ditched, or Ivan screaming, "Stevie!" And I find one of those funny. I think you can tell which one by the things I've said previously. Personally, I think this one is too much of a mixed bag to really say that it's great. But it's not bad either, it's just kinda something. A lot of high highs, a lot of repetitive dialogue, which equal low lows. So I guess make it out what you will. Watch it for yourself and see what you think. Number 57, Bad Dare Day.
Bad Dare Day centers around Mac and Blue daring each other to do lots of weird things, like eating something expired in the fridge or stealing Madame Foster's dentures. But then when Madame Foster catches them, she decides to take it one step further and turn it into a dare competition that spreads across the entire house. Things go swimmingly at first until Blue gives Yogi Boo Boo the idea to dare Mac to confess his feelings to Frankie, outing his crush on her. Afterwards, Mac decides to play dirtier than usual and does his best to win the dare competition and eventually take revenge on Blue by making him burn all of his paddle balls. I think this is mostly a fun episode, though it does still have the disadvantage of feeling not as fun as the earlier seasons. That said, there are still a few good moments here. I love the ending where Mac and Blue impersonate each other, Blue taking one of Mac's shirts, and then Mac dressing up as Blue as he yells,
Woo! Anarchy! Burn it all down! Woo!
That's a line that lives in my head rent-free. And of course, at the end, when Mac makes Blue realize how hurt he was by revealing his crush on Frankie, he does give a genuine apology. From what I've seen, most fans of the show believe this is the point where Blue realizes the true weight of his actions, but I actually think it happens way earlier, in the first half of the season. Still, this is a really good moment for them. I like it.
The best way I can describe this one is the good ending version of BlueTube. BlueTube was pretty close to making it into D tier, but this one, well, it's firmly in C. Blue is bad in this, yes, but it makes more sense narratively and is a lot more fun to be around, so naturally this episode's elevated a bit higher. As it stands, the dares are fun, the writing is fine, and the story elements are actually pretty solid. But once again, much like Land of the Flea, compared to the rest, it's just not as strong. Decent, but not great, you know? Number 56, Phone Home. Blue thinks that a man in a cell phone suit is actually a lost imaginary friend. So he tries to bring him back to Foster's, and that's kind of it. Although I will say, for what it lacks in plot, it makes up for with some pretty good humor. Not every joke lands, of course, and I'm sure there's someone out there who thinks that, Blue is evil, so this episode must be bad. But for me, I like to think that Phone Home knows what it is. It's a fast-paced, wacky 11 minutes, and it doesn't try to be anything more or less. Sometimes it's okay to just have a series of jokes and nothing else. They can't all be plot or character-heavy episodes. Otherwise, they just wouldn't have as much impact when they come along, would they?
Personally, on my end, I'd consider Phone Home to be in the latter half of the 15-minute episodes. The premise is really good, and I also love how Blue isn't really trying to do anything out of malice. He's just more of an innocent, jealous type towards Wilt when he gets a lot of attention for rescuing imaginary friends. Nothing in particular really stands out to me here, except for that one joke where Eduardo says he has something to tell Blue, and then Blue says,
"Not now, Eduardo. Can't you see I'm on the phone?"
But other than that, there's not really anything about this episode that stands out to me.
Funny enough, I feel the same way about Number 55, Something Old, Something Blue. It's good, but it could have been better with just maybe one more rewrite. After visiting an old folks' home, Blue feels that the residents have it made. They get waited on hand and foot, all of their needs are tended to, and they don't have to work a day in their lives.
Blue!
This is not okay.
So Blue pretends to be old and just does old people blue things for 22 minutes. Well, yes, some of the jokes are the typical old person meets young person jokes we see in other shows. I feel like Blue's charm and the old people being just, well, old people, makes it kind of fun. It's nothing groundbreaking, of course, that's why it's here in C tier, and I feel like, much like BlueTube, if they gave the script a little bit more time to develop, they could have really gone all out. Or, you know, have it take place in jail instead of an old folks' home like we talked about on a previous call.
Yeah, we're just gonna let that one stay with the fandom for now. So for me, Something Old, Something Blue is passable if I had to describe it. I wouldn't go out of my way to rewatch it, but I also wouldn't exactly mind seeing it again. There are some good things in here, of course, like Blue's friendship with the grumpy, crotchety old man of all people, and I also really love the way that he ends up getting admitted into the old folks' home. He falls into a fountain, and his body gets all wrinkly, and it almost looks water absorbent, which I think is a really nice detail considering Blue was based on a blanket. So you've got some of that good old fabricy goodness there. And of course, seeing Madame Foster and Mac pretend to be Batman and Robin as they parody the Batman theme, that's definitely one of the highlights of the episode. But other than that, it just doesn't really do that much for me.
Couldn't agree more. Number 54, Seeing Red. Terrence sees that Mac and Blue have their own unstoppable bond, which means that he can't take them down once and for all. So he creates his own imaginary friend. Why isn't it an Extremosaurus? Isn't that canonically what teenagers come up with? So this should be Extremosaurus, but is not, is Red. He's a giant red square that is gonna crush Blue to pieces. Except he's actually a pretty sweet guy who doesn't really want to hurt people. But Blue, kind of in a Bugs Bunny Yosemite Sam dynamic, knows full well what's going on, and puts Red in all these compromising situations to get him off his back. Much like Phone Home, the jokes are kind of the same, but I don't know, this one does a lot more for me, I guess. Like I was saying, it harkens back to the days of Looney Tunes or the small, scrappy guy having to defeat the big, dumb guy. And while I do think the jokes are funny, I feel pretty bad for Red. He's a pretty nice guy, all things considered, and if he wasn't following Terrence's orders, he might be a pretty good friend. Now, unlike Eurotrish in Foster's Goes to Europe, he's not exactly the punching bag, he's kind of the bad guy, so to speak. Yeah, he doesn't really want to hurt anybody, but he's still doing what Terrence says, and he does take after a little bit of his creator after all. At the end of the day, this one is just simple, old-fashioned fun, and I like it.
I do think it's really interesting expanding upon how Red isn't an Extremosaurus, how in spite of Terrence's awful behavior, Red actually turned out pretty good. I think this might have to do with subconscious reasons for creating imaginary friends. If Terrence wasn't as far gone as he already is, Red could have actually helped him become a better person. But of course, we see that's not what happens, and I'm pretty sure Red ends up in a better home afterwards, so at least he's got his happy ending.
Red going to another home, you say? A home like number 53, Blue's the Boss? I really hope he doesn't go to that home because I don't think he'd have much of a good time. Let's see what our resident not-apologist for Blue Regard Q Kazoo has to say about it. Then I'll chime in towards the end.
Okay, so the episode opens with Blue telling Wilt, Ed, and Coco and Frankie that an imaginary friend is in trouble and they have to save it. But they don't believe him because the last time he told them that, it was just an excuse to get them to go outside and play with him or something. But then Madame Foster insists that they believe Blue because in the off chance that he's actually right, then that would mean that doing nothing would allow that poor imaginary friend to get hurt. So they decide to go after him, and Blue tries to stage a rescue mission, but he fails, and then Madame Foster comes in and she saves the imaginary friend, and she gets all of the credit. While I do kind of understand why this happened, I can't help but feel bad for Blue because whenever he steps out of line, nobody really hesitates to grill into him and yell at him and sometimes slap him. But then, the one time he does a completely selfless deed, he's overlooked by everybody, and he's basically told by Frankie that the standards that Madame Foster has set are impossible to reach, and he's never going to be good enough. So of course he moves out and starts his own foster home, and nobody really takes it seriously, except Mac, who kind of understands where Blue's coming from, enough to actually tell everybody what the problem is.
What's his problem anyway?
He thinks we don't appreciate him.
But he doesn't handle it in the best way, and he keeps telling Blue, "This is stupid, Blue, come back to us." And of course, that only pushes him further away, and I just generally feel really bad for him. Especially since, despite Max saying that Blue doesn't feel appreciated, nobody does anything to prove him otherwise. Madame Foster tries to make a plaque for him, but he turns it down because he doesn't want pity or a consolation prize. He wants the real deal. But then everybody else is just content to let him sit out there until he decides to come back, because even though he might think he's not appreciated, he's crying over spilled milk, I guess. They never apologize to him, except for Mac, but that doesn't count because Mac always apologizes to Blue, and everybody else never really apologizes outside of Sight for Sore Eyes, which is a really bad look on them. Obviously, you can tell I don't really like this episode that much, but there are a few things that elevate it for me. Like, when it rains, Blue finds this stray cat named Chuck, and he takes him in, and they have this really sweet bond together. And after he gets him adopted in the heat of the moment, he quickly regrets his decision and goes to get him back. Which, of course, I think it's adorable. But other than that, yeah, this episode sucks, but not as much as the rest, so that's why it's still in C tier.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I probably would have gone to have put this a little bit lower in C tier, maybe even higher D tier, honestly, but the story elements are pretty good. Though I will say that I feel about this episode the way that Pie Guy Rules did about Have You Seen This Snail, being that, yeah, the story's pretty good, but it's not funny. Also, I don't really think it's all that entertaining either, because even though this is a comedy show, it doesn't always have to be funny, you know? But it still has to hold your interest, and for me, this one just doesn't do it. I think maybe if they went a little bit further into the comedy or a little bit further into the story and character development, this might have even been one of the show's best. But as it stands, it splits its attention between both sides, and therefore becomes the jack of all trades and master of none. I never really cared for this episode, not even when I was a kid, and when I came back to watch it, nothing really changed. So Blue's the boss. What else do you want us to say? Okay, moving right along to B tier. This is where things are starting to get good. Number 52, The Sweet Stench of Success. Foster's has a new featured friend program where they show off an imaginary friend available for adoption on public TV, and Blue, despite not being available for adoption, sees his chance to get famous and jumps on the screen. A sleazy ad director adopts Blue and makes him the one, the only, Dio! It is JoJo, right? I swear I've seen it. Blue shills this product, becoming famous in the process, but he misses Foster's and the people there and, of course, his creator. So the Foster's gang have to get Blue back, all while Blue is coping with the fact that he's a used-up deodorant stick.
Compositionally, this episode is really good. You've got a lot of feelsy moments, and of course, this is probably one of the episodes where most people can agree that they feel bad for Blue. After all, he didn't ask to get adopted. He was even lied to by the guy, Kip Snip is his name, by the way. Kip even lies to his face, saying that they're not adoption papers, they're work contracts. And then he only pulls the rug from under Blue when he tries to leave after being isolated from everybody. And then Kip goes on to lock him in a cage and starve him and overwork him. And it is nice that we get to see Mac, Welt, Ed, and Coco go to save Blue. Though it is sad that Mac is the one who gives up on Blue first because of some misunderstanding occurring. But still, he's able to snap out of it the minute Blue uses that special Morse code to call for help. But I guess what makes me reluctant to watch this episode is that it kind of feels similar to Blue's the Boss, where he's not being outright abused, but you can kind of see he's not treated the best by his own friends. And even though he's able to get out of that situation with Kip Snip, he goes right back to a marginally better situation that still hurts him a lot in the long run.
I offer advanced odor control and wetness protection, but my friends offer more like love and affection.
Blue, if this is how you're gonna act,
You're getting exactly what you deserve.
Next time you're feeling super and heroic, superheroes are. But
You're letting them get away with it!
It's just a sad reminder that at the end of it all, Blue doesn't really get a happy ending, even if it feels like it in the moment.
I'd say that in terms of writing, whether it be jokes or characterization, it's typical Foster's fare. Solid overall, but not really noteworthy. Until we get to the second half, that is, then it's Dio, Dio, Dio. All the Dio stuff is hilarious, and it's this alone that puts it in a B tier for me, because the rest, like I said, pretty good. Nothing really noteworthy until this point, but man, they are memes for a reason, let me tell you. Number 51, Crime After Crime.
Mr. Harriman's carrot addiction spirals out of control as he hides them all around the house and eats them all within minutes, forcing Madame Foster and Frankie to make it. A really gross dish that I wouldn't even wish upon my worst enemy to eat. And of course, as Mr. Harriman tries to cover his tracks, he grounds everybody in the house and says, "No supper" for them. So Blue tries to get in trouble, and ironically, none of his attempts work for once, which is a really funny inversion of what usually happens in the show.
Why, I could have been killed by that terrifying villain that was stalking me in the halls.
Now, you're not gonna hear me say this a whole lot in my adult life, but I honestly agree with Ben the Looney. This is one of the craziest, silliest, and funniest episodes of the show. I have a lot of fun every time I watch it because there's so much going on at all times. There's Wilt trying to figure out what his punishment's gonna be, Blue trying to get in trouble, Mr. Harriman going crazy, and a whole bunch of other stuff that they somehow squeeze into 22 minutes. If it were up to me, this one would be a little higher, but this is a consensus list, not just my own, so compromises had to be made.
And of course, the reason it's in B tier is because this is yet another unfair Blue ending, in my opinion. When Eduardo gets in trouble, he blames Blue, even though it wasn't actually his fault. And Blue tells Ed that he's trying to get in trouble to get out of the dinner. And I think in a normal situation, Ed would have tried to negotiate a deal with Blue, so that way Blue can starve while Ed gets to eat and basically avoids his punishment. However, he's after cerulean blood, so Blue is not only the one member in the house that has to eat it, but as the credit scene reveals, Frankie pretty much force feeds him all of it, just because his attempts to get out of trouble have prolonged her being able to actually make the dish and cause her to get slapped on the wrist by Madame Foster a lot. And while I kind of see why this happened, I still think it's a little bit too far.
Yeah, this is kind of a prelude for what we're gonna get into with the next slot, but these Blue gets punished endings don't really bother me all that much. Now when we get to whole episodes where it's constantly crapping on him, yeah, those ones I don't really care for, but this, I don't know, I don't really think that the last minute should really destroy the other 21, especially since I kind of think this is an ironic punchline. You know, Blue is trying to get in trouble and then he does get in trouble, but you get what I'm trying to say, right? And I won't say it's the best ending ever, but I don't know, I didn't think it was that bad.
I mean, as somebody who's very particular with her food, I would consider what Blue's punishment is to be a total nightmare. I probably would have been just like Blue in puking after every single bite, so I really feel him there.
And I guess that's another thing that separates us. I'll eat pretty much anything, so yeah. I won't knock it until I try it. Unless we're talking about the 1990 version, which, you know, isn't bad. It's just kinda neutered. Stephen King joke. Bet you didn't think you'd get one of those here. Number 50, Cuckoo for Cocoa Cards. Alright, so putting this one on the list was kind of an ordeal, because I really like it, and someone else doesn't. Can you guess who that might be?
Yep, you guessed it, it's me, winner, winner, chicken dinner. Okay, so honestly, I'm not sure if I'd say that I don't like it, but more so it's another one of those the ending ruins it for me cases. Otherwise, I think Cuckoo for Cocoa Cards is a pretty funny episode. Mac takes his class on a field trip to Foster's, and Blue tries to wow them over, but it doesn't work, and they gravitate towards Coco instead. To get revenge on Blue trying to steal her spotlight, she creates an entire collection of baseball cards for everybody at Foster's. Initially, Blue has no desire to take part in the collecting game, but then he learns that his card is the most common and basically the worthless one out of the collection. So he becomes obsessed with collecting every single card just to spite Coco. We have a few good comedy moments, like the iconic
Come on. No, Blue. Come on. No, Blue. Come on.
I'm not sure how many people are annoyed by this joke or think that it drags on too long, but I think it's just right. It's long enough where you get the idea, but it's not long enough to particularly become annoying. And of course, Blue's voice is not grating to my ears, so I have an advantage here.
You also gotta love that, considering that we've said that Blue is a kid, even though
I'm not a kid.
this is how kids get free cards from people, right?
Ultimately, the ending is almost one of the strongest endings that Foster's has created. Basically, when Blue finally gets his card after it's been thrown out by every single collector, this is the point where he realizes the weight of his actions and genuinely becomes remorseful when he sees how much he's hurt Coco. So later that night, he goes to apologize to her, even burning their cards just to prove that their friendship is worth that much. Coco seems to forgive him, laying an egg to reveal that she's made a bobblehead of him. At first it's a really sweet gesture, but then when Blue goes to show everybody the nice gift that Coco made for him, he discovers it's part of another collecting game and he is once again the worthless one. So from what I see, I don't really think Coco feels bad for what she did, judging by her face. To me, it looks like she's just sorry she got caught, but I could also see this being a case of, well, it's time for me to spite Blue again, and oh no, he apologized! Ah, crap, it's too late. But considering a lot of the other nasty moments in the show, I tend to lean more towards the first option.
And I 100% go towards the latter. I see Coco's face at the end being, well, here we go again, didn't really intend for this. Because the fact that everybody knows that the blue bobble body is the most common, you'd have to know that these have been out there for quite a while. But still, like I said, the endings just aren't really enough to ruin it for me, and I think that this is a really fun time. I was fighting hard to put this on the top of B tier, but no, here it is instead. And I'm gonna be angry forever.
Well, hey, it's payback for a choice we're gonna get to later in this list.
Ah, that's right. I was gonna do my own version of the extended come on joke, but you know what? I like this alternative route better. Number 49, Neighbor Pains.
On yet another Adopt a Thought Saturday, this time ran by Goo of all people, things quickly devolve into chaos when Madame Foster's arch enemy, Old Man Rivers, starts yelling at how all of the imaginary friends are walking on his lawn and how he threatens if they keep bothering him, he's going to call somebody to tow all of the cars and end Adopt a Thought Saturday forever. And Blue ends up getting his own rivalry with Old Man Rivers' grandson, fittingly named Young Man Rivers. Unfortunately, Madame Foster and Blue end up throwing all of the adoption papers at them by mistake, so they have to get the papers back or else nobody is going to be adopted on Adopt a Thought Saturday.
So just to see if I understand this correctly, does this imply that Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends is a government house? Or that they work with the government? Do you really have to go through the state in order to adopt an imaginary friend?
Considering that they're treated as second-class citizens and more like pets or property than actual people, it's harder to explain the deeper you go into the lore.
Ah, I see. We've made some comparisons before saying, oh, this episode is like the good or bad version of this. Well, this is, I think, the last time we're going to be doing that when I say, I think that Neighbor Pains is the less good version of Adopcalypse Now. They both have that espionage feel and swindling aspect, and this one does have the upside of having Orlando Blue. It's just that when comparing these two similar episodes, Adopcalypse Now comes out on top, but that's not to say that Neighbor Pains is bad. It's fun, it's got a nice atmosphere, and I love the double twist at the end where Old Man Rivers only cared about his lawn to impress Madame Foster, but then they just go right back to fighting again anyways.
And you could say the same with the younger counterpart, where Young Man Rivers ends up adopting an imaginary friend, and both Mac and Blue come to realize Young Man Rivers may have been acting out because he was lonely, only for both of them to start making faces again, and the rivalry is back on. Another moment I really like from this episode is when Blue gets trapped inside of Old Man Rivers' house, and that is the breaking point for Goo, who almost storms off to confront Old Man Rivers before Frankie stops her and explains what's going on. As we'll get into later on, I really do love Blue and Goo's dynamic, and it's really underrated in my opinion, especially considering Mac and Goo get a lot more focus. So it's really nice to see that she also cares about Blue at least as much as Mac.
Couldn't have said it better myself, so I'm not going to. Number 48, Camp Keep a Good Mac Down. The Foster's gang goes on yet another field trip / vacation. How many of these have they done?
I've lost count.
But you're supposed to be the, never mind. So yes, the Fosters gang go camping, and hilarity ensues. My favorite piece of hilarity being Mr. Harriman going wild. He comes across a group of rabbits and becomes one with them and, well, succumbs to his natural animal instincts. I don't know how natural they can be considering that he's imaginary and all, but it's still pretty cool to see.
Okay, this time I promise this is going to be the last time I compare it to another episode, but I feel like Camp Keep a Good Mac Down in a lot of ways is a better version of A Lost Cause. You have Blue being really terrible throughout the whole trip, like eating and drinking everybody's food and water, and then summoning rain when Mac's trying to make a campfire, which, to be fair, wasn't completely his fault, and I do think that's a really funny scene. And then, of course, jumping into quicksand instead of trying to get help. Even the few good moments he has, like, I don't know, the rain dance scene where it's mostly innocent ignorance.
It worked! My rain dance worked!
And the scene where he protectively gets Mac out of the camp when a bear attacks. Those are really good moments for him, but they're not enough to balance out the rest of the troublemaking antics. From what I could see, Camp Keep a Good Mac Down is considered to be one of the worst episodes of Foster's, but I think it's overhated. Mainly because, in spite of Blue's antics, it's really, really funny.
Exactly, yeah, and hearing that this is one of the worst both does and doesn't surprise me. I can easily see how Blue's behavior would get on people's nerves, but I don't know, he gets enough punishment here and there's enough other things going on, so it doesn't bother me as much as I could see it bothering others. I think what sets this apart from episodes like Blue Tube is that Blue isn't shutting down the conflict or comedy. He's adding to it and sometimes even inciting it, so without him, there wouldn't be much of an episode to go around. And what he provides for the most part is pretty good. I will say that there are some parts here where he gets on my nerves, but more often than not, I'm glad he's here. Number 47. One False Movie. Mac is doing a video tour of Foster's for a school project, and Blue decides to add his distinct voice and style to it all, in other words, adding fart noises over everything. So the school recruits Mac/Blue to create a 90-minute movie that's gonna be spectacular, educational, and all this other stuff. Blue goes overboard with making the movie as crazy as it can be, even having a Smash Mouth reference of all things, while Eduardo, not believing that Blue edited the previous movie, gets self-conscious about his, emissions. So he writes to Craig McCracken for help, and gets an episode of his favorite show made just for him, only to find out that, whoops, he recorded it over half of Blue's movie. Uh-oh.
And it would have been fine if it wasn't for that meddling monster. In all seriousness though, One False Movie is a really fun time. It's nice seeing Blue go out of control and get all wacky, and now that I think of it, looking back on this episode with everybody trying to put on a good show, this is probably as close to the Muppet Show you'll ever get, especially with Mac being a grade A Kermit.
I will not stand around while you do dumb things like that, Piggy. You have done that to me too many times, Piggy. I will not stand for it.
Which I think is really neat considering Foster's Home was inspired by the Muppet Show. Although part of me does wish we would have been able to see the full cut of T-Rexatron Alien Wolf 3, a prequel in time, The Unrelenting. Who knows if it would have been Blue Super Dude levels of good, or even better.
The sheer creativity of this episode never fails to blow me away. It's another one like Crime After Crime where they have so much going on, but everything seems to get an equal amount of focus, and every time you think Blue is done with his ridiculousness, it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. This thing always makes me smile, and hey, it taught me a valuable lesson. So long as everything else is good, you don't need an— Number 46. Blues Brothers. Not only is this easily the best of the Foster's 11-minute episodes, but it's the only one that I could say is 100% good. A lot of what I could say about One False Movie carries over here, but I'm even more astounded by this one because it does just as much wackiness in 11 minutes. Mac brings Blue to show and tell, and everybody loves him so much that they imagine their own Blue. Kind of. They don't come out quite right. Blue recruits the other Blues to be his minions until he remembers that Mac has tickets to their favorite ice show, so now all the Blues are pretending to be the real Blues so they can get the tickets. In the end, the Blues are adopted by the ice show themselves, which is good because apparently, according to House of Blues, the Foster's gang don't really look all too kindly on uncreative imaginary friends like poor Mojo here. So I'm not really sure how an army of Blues would fare, especially considering how people seem to hate him as the show goes on. But, who cares, that's just speculation. I love the sheer amount of variety they have with all the blues. It feels like every possible variation of this guy, minus the Rule 34 ones that I wish didn't exist, make it into this episode. And hey, you gotta love Eduardo disguising himself as Blue to go to the ice show. Aw, poor Eduardo. He just wanted to go to the ice charades.
I agree. Blues Brothers is absolutely the best of the 15-minute episodes. But I do have to bring up one major theory that's been floating around for a couple of years now. So, at the final showdown, Mac is able to tell the difference between the fake Blue and the real Blue because the fake Blue gives him this heartfelt speech about how they've been through everything together and that he loves him, and Mac just sees it as really sappy and he recognizes the other Blue as the real Blue. The theory that spawned from this ending is that Mac picked the wrong Blue, which is why he's so mean later on in the series. However, I don't really buy that theory. I think it's disingenuous to the two.
I will say though, if they did go with that as like a canon thing, disregarding what that does with the different theories you might have or how you feel about Blue himself, how cool would that be if they actually addressed that later on, right? Like,
What a twist!
I suppose you make a good point.
well, that's because I do, so Number 45, Busted. This is the most fostery episode of Fosters that ever fostered. Blue's tired of getting in trouble with Mr. Harriman, so he resorts to just standing around and doing nothing. Until, whoops, he destroys the priceless bust of Madame Foster.
I wouldn't have broken anything. Then you guys come along with all your no comprendo and I don't understand and make me move and knock over stuff.
So the rest of the gang help him play cover-up and try to prevent Mr. Harriman from finding out. Now this is the show I pictured when I saw House of Blues. Blue causing trouble, yes, but everybody being friendly and sticking up for each other, and at the end of the day having a chill, warming atmosphere despite being a show about zany imaginary friends. Yes, I like the jokes, yes, I like the story, but for me, Busted nails that atmosphere better than almost any other episode of the show. There are only 2 more I think that do it better, but we'll get to those a little bit later.
I think what ultimately helps Blue in this episode is that he doesn't actually do anything wrong. It's just that Mr. Harriman isn't just wanting him to follow rules, he wants him to follow a really specific schedule. For example, when he has to go to the bathroom, he has to do his bed first, and then he has to brush his teeth, and then he can go to the bathroom, even though he really, really needs to go. And then afterwards he seems to micromanage Blue with how he eats at the table. Somebody made him laugh mid-swallow, and that's a point against him. He needs to have proper elbows, straight back, and has to do everything exactly Harriman wants, or else he will convince Madame Foster to kick Blue to the streets. And later on, it's revealed that he actually would have done so behind her back.
Don't you think that's weirdly fucked up?
I think I don't really hide how much I do not like Harriman. Sometimes I'm not sure if I hate him per se, but he is a firm dislike character for me, and this is one of the biggest reasons why.
I don't know, I always like Mr. Harriman personally, though I will agree with the conversation we had off screen. I wish he got a bit more development as time went on. I'll talk a little bit more about this with Worldwide Wabbit, but for the most part, Harriman ends the show the same way he starts. Disregarding Destination Imagination, he's always a stick in the mud, or I guess as Madame Foster would say, a hot cross bunny, but that's kind of beside the point for right now. One of the other things I wanted to highlight before we move on, this was so clearly supposed to be the first episode after House of Blues. It wasn't production order, but it wasn't the first one to air. That would be Store Wars, and hey, let me see which one makes more sense. Having the first episode of the show being Blue getting used to the house rules, or the first episode of the show being everyone trying to buy a gift for Madame Foster. Of course, given the fact that we haven't talked about Store Wars yet, we both consider that one to be better than this, but in terms of being an introduction to the show outside of the pilot movie, which one do you think was the better choice?
Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Busted came right after House of Blues. On the one hand, the way it stands, I dislike Harriman less, since obviously if this chronologically takes place right after, then clearly he's not giving Blue a fair chance despite Madame Foster giving her all clear on the permanent stay rule. But if Busted did come first, I wonder if that would have softened people's opinions on Blue, and maybe they would have understood that this could have been one of the inciting incidents that caused him to spiral downhill from there.
The world will never know.
Number 44, Adopcalypse Now. It's Adopt-A-Thought Saturday, and Mac and Blue are having a really tough time. They don't want to see their friends get adopted because that means saying goodbye. So they go out of their way to sabotage everybody and ensure that nobody gets adopted. Okay, what do people think about this premise? Because this sounds like something that the Fosters fans, wouldn't exactly like, let's just say.
I think this one tends to get away with it because Mac and Blue are kids after all, so obviously you're going to be a lot more forgiving if a kid tried to stop everybody from getting adopted compared to, I don't know, Old Man Rivers.
That's where I'm coming from too, to be honest. I just wanted to make sure we were on the same page, you know?
Yeah, of course.
As a kid, I loved this one, but then when I stopped watching the show, I thought, no, this one's pretty nasty, I don't know. I don't think I'm really gonna go back and watch it all that much. Of course, I never really actually thought that. It was just a thought of, hey, maybe I should feel this way. It's complicated. You know what it's like being 12. But going back to watch it, I found that this is a whole bunch of creativity packed into one 22-minute package. Somehow, it's even faster and even crazier than One False Movie. And again, like V was saying, Mac and Blue are kids, and kids don't really like saying goodbye to their friends. That, and it's also clear that they're not doing this out of any sort of malice. They're doing this because, well, they want their friend group to stay together. Plus, they get what's coming to them at the end, so I guess all's fair in the end.
Well said. I think additionally, this is especially hard for Blue to deal with because, in case you haven't noticed, throughout the whole show, he never really seems to branch out from his main three friends, being Wilt, Eduardo, and Coco. So when you try to look at this from his perspective, maybe this is another reason why his walls get stronger, because he doesn't want to let too many people in and have to deal with the inevitable heartbreak.
A lot of our friends may finally have a chance to find new homes to call their own.
I know. That's the problem.
But that's just how it goes in a foster house. Sometimes you just have to say goodbye. And that's not exactly something that Blue will have to learn later on because, Wilt, Eduardo, and Coco don't really go anywhere. Yeah, Eduardo gets adopted in Read 'em and Weep, and technically everybody gets adopted in that one with the Abraham Lincoln pen. But aside from that, they're still at the house. And it's made clear at some point that Wilt never left the house at all and never gets adopted. So make of that what you will, or what you wilt, if you will.
As the show has said itself, when there's a Wilt, there's a way.
Oh, no. We already talked about that one. We're not going back. Number 43, Blue. This is another one where the style really puts it over the edge for me because, aside from just the creepy atmosphere or haunted house vibes, it's an okay episode. Mac and Blue play out in the rain and, as per the myth, they both get colds. Mac gets rushed home, but Blue, well, he's gotta stay in Foster's, and Blue goes white. Meanwhile, Eduardo, Coco, and Wilt think that he's the cannibal ghost from this definitely not made by Ed Wood movie they saw on TV. So Blue's gotta get better while the others gotta hunt him down. Writing-wise, it's pretty fun. Has some decent jokes and good character banter, but I like the creepy atmosphere most of all. There's tons of dark shadows and ominous music, great camera angles. This is definitely not one you can just have on in the background and do something else while it's on. You've got to pay full attention to really understand everything that Blue has to offer.
If I had a nickel for every time a Foster's Home Season 1 episode decided to make a joke about Blue looking like a ghost, I would have 2 nickels. Which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice, right? And even more convenient how one of them is at the beginning of the season, and this one is the season finale. Even though Blue doesn't feel much like an actual season finale to me, I do think it's one of the most creative episodes of the season. It's kind of cool seeing that dark atmosphere return, but without the dark tone. I especially love the moments where they kind of make fun of the genre, like when Coco suggests that they call Ghostbusters, but they've been out of business for years. Or how the ghost catching device that they use to catch Blue looks a lot like the one Luigi uses in Luigi's Mansion. Though the standout moment of the episode for me is when Blue goes to the bathroom and he starts hallucinating that his reflection is talking to him, and at some point it gets really trippy when the reflection pulls on his face to make a trumpet nose thing, and suddenly you see a tiny little blue band playing some song that sounds a lot like Bendy and the Ink Machine. Good stuff, really.
And I think that summarizes Blue the best. It's wild, it's trippy, and it's a lot of fun. I actually would argue that it is sort of a season finale, but only in the sense of Season 1. Season 1 is a lot quieter, more down to earth. so it would make sense that their season finale would be sort of in that same vein, kind of being slice of life and laid back, but also taking things up a notch in terms of creativity and ominous spooks. But speaking of ominous spooks, it's time for number 42, Barry Scary. I gotta say, I love Barry. I think she's a hilarious character with some great facial expressions, and you can tell that Grey Delisle, she's having a great time playing Barry. The plot of this episode is that a brand new friend, guess what her name is, moves into Foster's and immediately, for some reason, falls in love with Blue. She becomes the yandere of the 2000s and won't let Blue talk to anybody else, especially not Mac. Mac and Blue are trying to go for a world record, and Barry's not having it, so what does she do? Try to kill Mac, of course! Numerous times.
Barry Scary is a really funny episode, and now that I think of it, I feel like Barry is kind of a lampoon on other characters that are made to be a full-on love interest, but really do not take rejection well from the main character. You know the kind. Panini, Puka, even the Kinker sisters to some extent. It's hilarious hearing Blue get her name wrong every single time until he finally comes up with Heather, which, as a Heathers fan, I find hilarious. Barry is pretty much a Heather Duke who looks like a Heather Chandler, but also fits perfectly with that one Heather McNamara line from the musical.
If I took a meat cleaver down the center of your skull, I'd have matching halves. That's very important.
And of course, overall, the episode is really fun too, not just from Barry, but we've also got some really good moments on Mac and Blue's end, where they really solidify with the audience how strong their bond is.
I also think that's one of the standout moments too. It's just seeing Blue not trying to get into trouble, not causing anybody any grief. It's him and his creator having a grand old time. And this is one of the episodes that I feel shows Mac as being a kid the best. This is showing Mac being a dumb little kid doing what dumb little kids do best, trying to break a world record and not really knowing what they're doing. At least until it comes to the rubber band ball thing, and then the two become surprisingly competent. But Barry is what drives this episode for me. She is so fun, so crazy, and so deluded that every time she opens her mouth, I can't help but laugh. I love all the little touches, like when she gets desperate trying to tell Mac that she's got a good way of noticing things, all while actually not noticing that Blue doesn't care about her at all. Or how's about that one moment that almost made me laugh out loud when I was all alone watching it, where Barry is stabbing something while talking about how much she hates Mac, only to find out that she was cutting a crispy rice square. I cannot believe they got away with that.
You know what else I can't believe they got away with? Shoving Barry to the forefront of merchandise when she's only appeared in Foster's twice. Now that's what I call a breakout character.
Wait, if she was so popular, why did they only use her twice?
They probably ran out of ideas after a Fairweather Friends.
But there's so many more places you could go. Alright, we could be here forever, but the point is, Barry's scary, not so scary when you watch it. It's funny. Okay, that was terrible, but we're keeping it.
Yeah, you could say it's very funny.
That's so much better. Why didn't I think of that? Number 41, Room with a Feud.
Room with a Feud starts with this imaginary friend moving out of the house and leaving behind this really cool, super awesome room. Blue wants it, Coco wants it, Eduardo wants it, and most importantly, Wilt wants it.
I want it too!
They're all fighting to get the room. Mr. Harriman is very indecisive in giving the room to somebody. Really, out of all of them, Wilt deserved the room the most because it had his favorite thing. Basketball. Some random imaginary friend named Peanut Butter tries to join the competition, but nobody wants him there.
What's this, the Will, Ed, and Coco show?
No, it's the Blue Show. Now get out of the way.
And this is a really crazy fun episode. I loved seeing Wilt, Ed, and Coco stooping down to Blue's level per se and playing dirty and cheating and rigging the games to try to get the room, while they're all very much at each other's throats, but not in a way that feels mean-spirited. Well, okay, actually, aside from the moment where Eduardo picks up Blue and slam dunks him in a trash can.
Now you live in the trash.
I like that we get to have a four-way conflict, well, kind of five if you count Peanut Butter, and you can side with anybody you like, because in a way, they all make some valuable arguments. Wilt's gone through a whole lot, so he deserves to have that room, especially since the room he's in now doesn't fit him at all. Coco is a girl rooming with a bunch of guys. You get what I'm trying to say, right? And this episode has something that I don't see a lot of other cartoons pulling off when they have the similar plot, a good sense of pacing. They don't do the crazy stuff right away. It builds and builds and builds until there's the ultimate payoff at the end with peanut butter getting it, but then no, that's not the payoff either. It builds from that again, ultimately resulting in, I think, one of the funniest endings in the show, where they get the room, but they all end up sharing it, and things revert back to the status quo. So yeah, if you're a writer who's maybe struggling with comedic pacing, give this one a shot. You might learn a thing or two if you're not careful.
And of course, on my end, I do think the ending is a little more sweet than funny. Yeah, it is funny that all 4 of them end up being roommates again, but I just think it's really sweet how it starts off with Ed sleeping in the room by himself, but he's all scared and Wilt comes in to comfort him, and then Coco decides to go, and then Blue revels in having a room for himself finally, only to realize he misses his friends and decides to go back with them. I just think it's a really sweet moment. Although, it does become a lot funnier when, after you hear Wilt rolling over so Blue can have a bed again, Jackie Cones comes in and gets the room for himself. So, at least somebody gets to have a room all to themselves, right?
For now, at least. Number 40, The Big Cheese. I bet a lot of you are wondering why this is not an A tier.
Yeah, I'm wondering that myself. Care to explain, Trevor?
Yeah, I don't like cheese. There we go. I said it. Now, that's not to say that The Big Cheese is an episode I hate. For the most part, I think it's pretty well done. Cheese is bothering everybody, so Mr. Harriman gets a security system, but he misreads the manual thinking that entering in a random security code means random every time, so now they're locked outside of the house before a big news show, and wouldn't you know it, Cheese is there causing problems, but surprise of all surprises, Cheese has a good memory and remembers the code, at least in terms of beeps. So the episode's all about appeasing Cheese to get that code before it's too late.
Now, this is the episode I would have ranked higher, like maybe at the top of A tier or the bottom of S tier. But this is a consensus list, so here we are. Thankfully, that doesn't stop me from gushing about how much I love The Big Cheese. It's honestly kind of hard to explain, actually, because the main thing about The Big Cheese is that it's really funny, especially during that one scene where they're trying to calm down Cheese after he has a meltdown, and they're singing different lullaby songs to him. But then Blue comes in singing this very grotesque one about great green globs of greasy, grimy gopher guts, and everybody doesn't think it's gonna work. But then lo and behold, Cheese is almost calmed down until Blue decides to ruin it at the last minute just because he wanted to. That's just hilarious, especially the way he's clapping afterwards. He kind of looks like a toy monkey.
And that stuff's all fine and good for me, at least for the most part. I also think that nursery rhyme bit is pretty funny, especially since it doesn't go on all that long. And with Blue, Coco, and Eduardo's contributions, they managed to shake things up and prevent it from being just the same thing over and over again. But unlike that one joke, the rest of the episode didn't get that memo. One of the things I like about Mac Daddy, which we'll be talking about later, is that Cheese is not the central joke. It's everybody reacting to Cheese and not liking his presence. This time, however, all the reactions are screaming, anger, or angry screaming, and it's not in any funny way either. See, we just get Frankie losing her temper, we get Wilt going out and getting more stuff so he's barely in this, there's Cheese screaming and saying random stuff. It's funny at first, but it really overstays its welcome, especially when Goo shows up because she brings the worst out in Cheese. And I'm not saying this is a bad episode at all. In fact, I put it above episodes like Berry, Scary, and Blue. It's just, well, if it was only the first 2/3 of this thing, I'd put it a bit higher. But at the end where they're doing all this ridiculous stuff and Cheese is making more noises and there's more screaming, I don't know, I'm just kind of done with it by that point. This was my favorite as a kid, but now it's pretty good. Don't flame me in the comments. I said I liked it! Number 39, Squeaker Box. That's how it's pronounced, right?
I thought it was pronounced Squeaker Box.
Well, either way, I'm not sure we can have this title card on YouTube because the triple X at the end means something else in this day and age, so let's just censor this whole episode just to be safe.
I'll try my best. Squeaker Box is an episode that I have a lot of nostalgia for. It was actually my introduction to Foster's, so naturally I'm a bit biased. But even without the nostalgia bias, I think it's a pretty good episode. Basically, you have Mac, Blue, Wilt, Eduardo, and Coco at an arcade, and everybody decides to pool in their tickets to get a prize that they can share, and it just so happens to be the squeaky rubber elephant, much to Blue's dismay because he wanted to bring home a pair of glow-in-the-dark Dracula teeth. On the ride back to the house, everybody starts arguing about who's going to play with the toy first, so Frankie decides to settle it for them, though unfortunately, as she has Blue hold the toy, he finds out that it squeaks, and he becomes attached to that thing like a dog with its chew toy.
Kind of fun.
And then the rest of the episode is basically Blue being obsessed over the rubber elephant toy, constantly asking when it's his turn. And then finally, when he does get his turn, you see him in basically a complete state of euphoria as he envisions himself dancing with the rubber elephant in a field of flowers. And then he accidentally breaks it, and then he has to fix it. This episode is pretty crazy, though I'm not sure if it's as crazy as I make it out to be. But still, it's a lot of fun.
One of the things I think is really funny about this episode is it's so relatable. Even I, as an only child, I know exactly how this goes. A set of kids who are part of the same family go to an arcade, they pool their tickets, then they have to decide what to get and how to use it. Just like in Barry's Scary, where we get to see Mac and Blue act a lot like kids, this time we see everybody act like kids, even though Coco, Eduardo, and Wilt probably aren't. But even so, part of what makes this thing so funny is just how relatable it is. There's the kid that gets overly attached to the toy, treating it like it's real. There's the one who gets so excited when it's their turn and makes everybody annoyed. They don't exaggerate it all that much, but part of the fun is seeing the real-life circumstances play out in this episode. And we get a lot of good character moments here and a good spotlight on Eduardo as well, so what's not to love?
Though I think the kicker to this episode is the ending. Blue obviously breaks the toy by misbehaving. It's an accident, but he plays with it after hours when he's supposed to be sleeping. So in the end, he ends up getting punished when Mac buys another rubber elephant for them to cover up Blue's tracks. But then Eduardo comes in screaming because he thinks that the rubber elephant is going to get hurt in Blue's hands. Blue ends up swallowing the toy somehow. And then he's put in an ironic kind of punishment where he's treated like a toy and he's doted on and hugged and cuddled. They take the mushy gushiness up to 11.
So yeah, Squeaker Box, just go watch it. Number 38, Fools and Regulations.
This is probably the closest season 6 ever gets to feeling more like seasons 2 through 4. Basically, the gist of the episode is that Frankie and Mr. Harriman have invited a lot of these rich donors to come to Foster's and convince them to continue donating to them. However, as they want to make a good impression, they fear that Blue, Wilt, Ed, and Coco are going to ruin things because they constantly can't make up their minds on what they want to do. Do they want to go outside or do they want to play inside? Eventually, Frankie forces them to choose one, and they decide to go outside, but then they regret that decision quickly when Mac comes in saying that he's got some video games he wants to play with them, and they realize that Frankie is not going to let them back in until the event is over. So they're basically trying to get back into the house without getting noticed, and then when Frankie and Mr. Harriman catch on to what they're doing, they decide to lock them out of the house because although they haven't actually broken any rules, Frankie still wants to punish them, so it becomes a full-on war, and it's chaos, and it's beautiful, and I kind of love it.
You know what? Ditto. Number 37. The Blue Super Dude and the great creator of everything's awesome ceremony of fun that he's not invited to. I love Blue Super Dude. I kinda wish they did more of these, but at the same time, you don't want to overdo a good thing, you know?
Yeah, definitely. I would have loved if the Blue Super Dude appeared once per season, and technically he did, but it's still not enough for me.
Well, technically he appears in every episode if you want to get really specific.
In this thrilling sequel to the Blue Super Dude and the Magic Potato of Power, the Blue Super Dude is being held captive by his archenemy Frankincense. He wants to attend the great creator of everything's awesome ceremony, but she doesn't want him to go. This is because, in real time, Blue is sick, and Frankie doesn't want him to get anybody else sick at the party. As you can tell, this version of the story is a direct hallucination on Blue's end. He envisions his trials and tribulations in trying to go to Mac's birthday party as grandiose as possible, which is very fitting for a Blue Super Dude episode, and let's just say there's a reason that lightning strikes twice.
I'm sure will transport me directly to the ceremony. Then my presence will be known!
Sure, I don't like it as much as the magic potato of power, but I still enjoy it.
I couldn't agree more. As a sequel, it's naturally going to be compared to the first, and when you do that, well, let's just say it's no contest. But this one still got a lot of charm. I do think they play a little too heavily into the Blue Super Dude mixing in with reality at some points, but at the same time, that's one of the best ways you can differentiate it from the first episode and not make it just a repeat, you know? So I'm kind of mixed on that, I guess, now that I think of it. But the writing is still solid, the imagination's still on point, and it's really cool seeing Blue try so hard to get to his creator's birthday party when, really, he shouldn't. Either he's just this in the mood for birthday cake and presents, or he really wants to hang out with Mac. I'd believe either one, honestly.
I believe both, though in a way that is soured by his present being I owe you a birthday gift and an I owe you a birthday gift, but oh well, what you gonna do? The poor guy's broke.
I guess he could always give him a new magic potato, but we're not quite there yet.
And we've still got a long ways to get there. Trust me.
Contract the rainbow, taste the rainbow.
Number 36, Schlockstar. So there's a band at the Foster's house called Pizza Party, and Blue isn't allowed to join, so he creates his own band called Taco Fiesta. The whole plot can be summarized as, hey mom, can we go listen to Pizza Party? We have Pizza Party at home. Pizza Party at home.
Hey, that's disrespectful to Taco Fiesta. Pizza Party at Home is the Blue Sabbath Experience Mach 3.
I stand by what I said. This is another one of those episodes where Blue's a jerk, he causes problems, and a lot of people seem to think he's annoying. I don't know, I find him charming in this one. I'm gonna mention this one again when we talk about Cookie Dough, but as for Schlockstar itself, I can't get mad at Blue here because he's just so stupid and inept. Obviously he's trying to get attention, of course, and be revered amongst the Foster's people, but he's so bad at this that you can't help but laugh. And he doesn't cause anybody any genuine hurt. It's a lot like that Jimmy Neutron episode where, once again, the group starts a band. Yeah, this is a pretty common plot in cartoons with even my favorite show of all time, Dave the Barbarian, doing the same thing. Albeit a little bit differently than most, admittedly.
And not just cartoons either. Disney Channel did this at least twice with its live-action shows, being Wizards of Waverly Place and Sweet Life of Zack and Cody. But to be fair, this video is not about them.
Yeah, because then we'd be getting into things like Saved by the Bell or Shasta McNasty.
Anyways, back to the actually good stuff. I agree with Trevor here. Schlockstar is really funny. Even with Blue's incompetence in trying to start a battle of the bands, he's just so goofy. Just look at his makeup. He looks like he would fit perfectly as a band member of Kiss, but then he has the swagger of Murdoch Nichols from Gorillaz. Which part of me wonders if his interview is supposed to be a reference to the MTV Cribs segment featuring Gorillaz. After all, Craig McCracken is friends with the two, and they have referenced each other in their work multiple times.
That is something else I really like about Schlockstar is they did their homework. As the son of a musician, I can say that my dad would be proud. There are so many music references here from the mainstream to the obscure. See if you can collect them all.
One of my gripes with the episode is that in the end, when Blue tries to do his solo, but it turns out that he has all of the special effects but no actual band to play, he could have briefly saved himself if he tried playing air guitar like he did in Dinner is Swerved in that one gag. Maybe it wouldn't have saved him entirely, but at least it would buy him some time, considering after a while they'd probably realize that's not a real instrument, and then that's when they start pelting him with the tomatoes. But who cares, it's still a good ending either way.
A good ending to a good episode. Number 35, Nightmare on Wilson Way.
Ooh, spooky. It's honestly shocking how much I love Nightmare on Wilson Way. Basically, what happens is it's Halloween, and everybody is tired of Blue pulling the same snake-in-a-can prank every year, so they decide to play a prank on him back, but nobody, not even the audience, knows about this until the end. In Blue's perspective, he tries to pull the prank on Mr. Harriman, But when he does, he seems to die of a heart attack, so he buries him out in the backyard, but then he turns into a zombie, and then now it's up to him, Wilt, Eduardo, and Coco to survive the zombie apocalypse as everybody at Foster's starts turning into zombies.
Everything I said about Blue can apply here, but much, much more. Better atmosphere, better art direction, better banter.
¡Necesitamos irnos! ¡Necesitamos irnos!
¡Eduardo!
¡Nadie quiere ser un zombie! ¡No quiero ser un zombie!
¡Contrólate, hombre!
And this one was in 3D when it first came out. And I missed it. Dang it.
Hey, don't worry, I missed it too.
I'm kinda copping out for this one too, but really, it's just Blue, but better. One thing I would like to say though, much like that one joke in Barry Scary, this episode is so dark that I'm not sure how they got away with it. I mean, Mr. Harriman dying? Really? Cartoon Network used to have guts. What happened? I say as somebody who's not watched Cartoon Network in about 10 years.
So amidst the comedy in this zombie apocalypse parody, what I think stands out to me is how, even though this is orchestrated by everybody else, Blue kind of proves himself to have a heart of a hero here. When he's stuck on the roof with Coco and Ed, and they're talking about how badly they need to escape, he insists that they don't leave until they get Mac out of there. Ed and Coco are telling him it's too dangerous, but he cannot leave his best friend and creator behind. And I think that's a really sweet detail. I don't know if Mac was in on the prank or not. They kind of leave that ambiguous, but ultimately it leads to Blue's downfall. Because he does do the right thing in the scenario, given that the zombie apocalypse was actually real and not a prank. He feeds Mac candy and he goes on a sugar rush and they start running through the halls as he attacks all of the zombies. And then when it's revealed that it's a prank, Blue is still punished because obviously it was his fault for setting off Mac because he should have known better that none of this was real. I hate endings like these.
If this is some kind of practical joke, it's not funny.
This is why I say I'm surprised that I love Nightmare on Wilson Way so much, because by all logic, the ending should have ruined it. But the rest of the episode was just so strong to me, and considering that we don't see Blue's punishment in the end of the episode, even though it is a given that it happened off screen, I guess that explains why I don't have it ranked as low as Better Off Ed or Ticket to Rod. Which I should mention, Nightmare on Wilson Way was aired between Ticket to Rod and Better Off Ed, so we finally complete the 3-hit combo that makes Season 6 feel hopeless as a Blue fan.
Yeah, the ending isn't the best. I think it's a pretty lackluster way to get a cheap laugh, but hey, it's only about, 30 seconds? And the rest of this thing is good, so I say give it a watch. Number 34, A Fairweather Friends. A rich kid who's definitely not Barry or a copy of Remy Bucks Aplenty befriends Blue, and now Blue has to juggle being friends with this kid and his creator, all while preventing Mac from catching on that he's secretly seeing another friend behind his back. I love that they have this play out as sort of an affair in a marriage rather than a friend possibly being jealous of another friend. It's not like what Drawn Together would do sometimes where they just play the trope straight. This time, it's kinda there, kinda not. Like if you're not aware of it, you'd think this is hilarious and not just weird. But if you are aware of the trope, then it's gonna be even better. And hey, it's got Barry, proving once and for all that if Blue knows what's good for him, and sometimes he does, he would stay away from this girl. She is not right. And I think this is one of the few times we see Duchess being helpful when she gives Mac advice. First time for everything, I guess.
To be fair, we are talking about the same lady who tried to kill Blue at the beginning of the series, so obviously she's just doing that to screw him over. Which I will say, Blue cheating on Mac is the worst thing he ever did, but I think it's funny. It's got a weird sense of humor. Like, for some reason, there's this one scene where Barry is trying to pick which imaginary friend he wants to adopt, and he picks Blue, and then it cuts to him eating a banana. I have no idea why that scene is so funny to me, but it is. But I think what ultimately makes this episode is the ending. When Barry reveals, she was Barry all along, and ties up Mac to a rubber ball so that way she can kill him. Blue is about to go save Mac, but then she stalls him by throwing the automatic paddle ball in his way, because he's been trying to play with the automatic paddle ball this whole episode. It's this really good moment where he looks between the paddle ball and Mac, he picks up the paddle ball, and you think that's the end of it, but then, Mac! It's It's funny how this decision recontextualizes that part where he's looking between the paddle ball and Mac. Suddenly, you realize he's not actually trying to choose between the two, he's figuring out how he can use the paddle ball to save Mac. And that's a really sweet subversion of expectations, especially right afterwards when Blue gives the most heartfelt apology to Mac in the entire series.
No, it's not okay. I was selfish and dumb, and I took you for granted, and it almost got you. Paddle ball!
And that's one of the things I think that A Fair Weather Friends does better than most episodes of the show. Subtlety. Again, whether it's the marriage affair trope, Blue deciding how he's gonna save Mac, or even Blue's book being about dieting tips, this episode has a lot of under-the-radar jokes and plot lines, and I gotta applaud them for this. Not a lot of episodes were able to do this on the same level. I kinda wonder why not. Maybe it's just the plot of the episode needed this or something, I don't know. Anyways, number 33, The Bride to Beat. Due to a misunderstanding, Blue thinks that Mac is getting married. In order to not lose his best friend in the whole world, Blue decides to grow up. And in growing up, Blue proves just how immature he really is. If this doesn't show that Blue cares about Mac, I don't know what will. Yes, it's sweet to see him try to grow up with Mac so they can be friends for life, which has been made clear in the past that ultimately this is what Blue really wants. It's also really funny on top of that seeing just how badly Blue fails at understanding adult life. Let's face it, he grew up in a household with a single parent who was always off working, so the closest thing Blue had to an adult figure in his life before coming to Foster's was Terrence. And that's not the best influence you can have, so most of Blue's knowledge probably either comes from overhearing some of the things Mac's mom used to say or watching TV. I don't know, it's sweet, it's funny, it's The Bride to Beat. And the episode to beat right now, although there are apparently 30-some more ahead of it, so it's not the best the show's gonna get, but still really good.
Oh, absolutely. And you know, so much for being not a kid, as Blue insists in Frankie, My Dear. Heck, the ending of Bride to Beat has Blue, except that he's still a kid, just like Mac, so there's basically no excuse for anything in the past that we may have discussed about everybody being too harsh on Blue. But I digress. The Bride to Beat has a really good mix of emotional moments and comedy. 1 minute you'll see Blue ripping off the door of a shed with no issue whatsoever, only for Mac to put it back with also no issue whatsoever. But then the next you'll have Blue crying over how he's going to lose Mac because he's going to get married. Oh no! And of course this all culminates in that amazing ending where Blue crashes the wedding and just makes a mess out of everything and Mac applauds him for it. And you really have a nice parallel of the ending from The Graduate, where instead of them momentarily being happy sitting on the bus together as they're driving away only to fade to not happy faces, no, Mac and Blue are still palling around and being happy and talking about what they're going to do next as kids. So yeah, this is a really sweet entry.
Number 32, Bye Bye Nerdy.
Where do I even start with Bye Bye Nerdy? I guess recapping the plot. Blue is playing some Space Invaders game and finally gets the high score, beating Mac, who previously had the highest score on the game. But as he goes to his school to brag about it, he sees Mac supposedly sitting in a study hall area, and he comes to the horrifying realization that his best friend and creator is an absolute nerd. So he tries to help him be cool.
You got the coolest imaginary friend there is. I'm cooler than cool. I'm icy chill.
This episode is filled with funny moments. From Blue practicing how he's going to brag about beating Mac's high score, to him laying it on cold with the brutal truth to Mac before comforting him and telling him that he's going to help him be cool, that jab at poorly synced English dubs of Japanese films and anime.
You have disgraced my people. We shall engage in combat.
And of course, one of the most iconic lines in the series.
It's 106 blocks to Mac. I've got a full bladder, half an idea where I'm going. It's Tuesday, and I'm wearing sunglasses. Hit it!
And funny how with A Fair Weather Friends, you have Blue cheating on Mac with another kid. Mac decides to flat out abandon Blue due to peer pressure until Blue chases after Mac so that way he doesn't get adopted, and Mac stands up for Blue when he's being brutally bullied over being a nerd. It's a very sweet moment, just like in A Fair Weather Friends, except this time you get to see it from the other way around.
I'll admit, I didn't really like this one at first. As a kid, it was never one of my favorites, So naturally, having not watched it in a long time, when I made my first version of this tier list, I put it pretty low. Then after a pretty heated discussion, I decided to rethink it, and sure enough, I was surprised with just how much I missed as a kid. All those jokes that V mentioned were great. The Mac and Blue moments were great. But I'm surprised that they were able to get both of those done well and with a lot of focus in just 22 minutes. Just goes to show that Foster's really was meant to be a long-form series. That, and also the fact that barely any of the 11-minute episodes made it out of C tier, so make of that what you will. Number 31, The Buck Swaps Here. I remember this one being advertised a lot, especially Mac asking if anybody's lost a $100 bill. Yeah, as soon as I read the description, all the memories of those ads came flooding back. The Foster's gang goes to a swap meet and Eduardo finds $100. Naturally, as these plots tend to go, everybody sees Eduardo's money and wants him to spend it on them. So it's up to Eduardo to steal his nerves and buy something he really wants, all while the gang makes fools of themselves at this pretty interesting location. You don't see very many cartoon episodes taking place at a swap meet. The only other one I can think of is one of the very few episodes of My Little Pony I've seen, but I remember nothing about it, so I guess moving on.
Yeah, the Buck Swaps Here is beautifully chaotic. Kind of like what Trevor said about Room with a Feud. This is another episode where it slowly builds up more and more and more until you reach the peak of chaos when everybody is chasing after Eduardo to get his $100. And when they build up everybody not being so above it all after all, they do it really good too. Of course, you start with Blue telling Ed that he should buy him a statue of a mongoose being attacked by cobras. And then you've got Mac wanting Ed to buy back the not Star Wars collection that he had to sell in one false movie to fund the film. You have Harriman saying that he should save it, Madame Foster saying that he should spend it on anything he wants. And then there's Wilt, who's not actually asking Ed for anything. He's just severely dehydrated and wants water, so it's not like the poor guy has any choice compared to Ed.
And I do love that Eduardo does pick to spend his money on Wilt, but whoops, they don't accept $100 bills. Really, we're not doing this justice. This is one of those where you just gotta go see it, stop listening to us, and watch it, but only after you finish this video, please. Number 30, Mondo Coco. Alright, so this is the Pie Guy Rules fan in me talking here, but for those of you who are like me and miss that guy very much, do you remember that segment in every episode of SpongeBob Season 3 Reviewed where he talks about Ugg? He said that while the episode was visually interesting, and it was able to get some decent jokes across without any language, the story overall fell flat because, well, there was no story, and as a result, the jokes tended to be the same thing over and over. Mondo Coco is Ugg done right. While yes, I do love Ugg, Mondo Coco tells the grand story with no language except for Coco, 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 Coco. Way better than Ugg could ever hope to do. And it's great that we get to see a Coco episode for once, and it's not Coco and Mr. Harriman or Coco and Blue. It's Coco going out in the world, having her own adventure, and finally getting some solo time with her to develop her character. That doesn't really happen all too often now, does it?
Yeah, and I have to say, if you told me about this episode a long time ago where it's just centered on Coco and barely cuts back to anybody else, I wouldn't have thought it would work. Not in a million years. But you know what? I love being pleasantly surprised, and Mondo Coco is absolutely one of those moments. I love seeing Coco's journey, where the minute she's able to roam free from Foster's and finally have her little adventure all on her own, it turns out to be not so little. So it starts small with Coco saving a spoiled rich girl's pet and then tutoring her because she's the only person that the pet can actually stand instead of attack. She basically shows the girl the meaning of life, and then she gets on a talk show, and then Coco goes on a cruise ship, she performs on the cruise ship, she suddenly conquers Japan, and it finally culminates with her having an interesting romance with the abominable snowman. And by interesting, I mean there is an actual shot where the two are spooning in bed together. Now that I can't believe they got away with. Good for you, Coco.
You go, Coco.
Man, with all the stuff in Foster's and Powerpuff Girls, and all the adult jokes I've heard about in Friendship is Magic, you gotta wonder what's going on in the heads of Craig McCracken and Lauren Faust. Number 29, Go Goo Go.
Go Goo Go is by far one of my favorite episodes in the show. Not only does it introduce Goo, one of my favorite Foster's characters, but it also reveals a particularly soft side to Blue that basically never gets explored in any of his dynamics with anybody else. But I'm getting carried away here. Mac meets this girl named Goo, short for Goo Goo Gaga because her parents had her name herself when she was born, and he quickly finds out that Goo is this hyperactive chatterbox who can create a whole army of imaginary friends within seconds. Now, most people, including Mac himself, Frankie, Mr. Harriman, and whatnot, they're all freaked out by her. They think she's super weird. But then Blue comes in, he sees her as probably the most amazing person he's ever met, and then suddenly he starts uncontrollably giggling around her and treating her like a queen, and for once, it's not all about him. He makes it all about her.
I love checkers.
Hey, where's Goo?
Oh yeah, this little guy has a huge crush on her. But nobody notices because they're too busy thinking that Mac is in love with her because, come on, a human boy, a human girl, no other human kids that they know. Clearly that indicates they're meant to be. But clearly, you know, my preference lies somewhere else.
For me, this is one of the few times where I can legitimately say, I like Goo. I like that we get more of a human side to her rather than her being wild, crazy, and overimaginative. The things she thinks up are great. The episode's fun and creative, it's funny, and most importantly, it doesn't have her run her mouth constantly and annoy the audience. Jeez.
Honestly, this episode is so close to being in my top 10 just because of how much I love Goo and how much I love Blue absolutely being head over heels for her. I just think it's the sweetest thing. But of course, I do think the episode would not have been as strong without Blue getting all giggly around Goo and clearly having a crush on her. And hey, if I sound repetitive, let me remind you that the rest of the characters in this episode would not shut up about how they think Mac loves his girlfriend, so I think I get a pass here. Don't you think?
Sure. And I think the fact that I'm not really a shipper at all, period, kind of factors into me putting it in high B tier. But hey, I get my way in the end, so I win! Number 28. Challenge of the Super Friends. This is like a fair weather Friends, but somehow even better. Mac befriends Imaginary Man, who's not only the greatest imaginary superhero in the world, but he's also the biggest boy stereotype in the world, and his arch nemesis is, well, Nemesis. Not only the world's greatest imaginary supervillain, but also the biggest girl stereotype around, and Blue gets jealous of Mac hanging out with this super cool imaginary friend. So in order to win Mac back, as well as get some attention, Blue falls in with the evil Nemesis. And it plays out much like a Saturday morning cartoon, even having Eduardo watch the whole thing while eating breakfast. He never stops, even though it's been days, but hey, it's a funny joke and it's clever, so I'll let it slide.
Honestly, I cannot believe that this episode is easier to watch than The Sweet Stench of Success, but also way more heartbreaking. Because you see, it's not just about Blue getting jealous that Mac is hanging out with somebody else. Mac is actively ditching him, he won't stop talking about Imaginary Man, he leaves him to build their treehouse alone, and then when the treehouse is finally built, he turns it into a secret hideout for Imaginary Man while obliviously kicking Blue out. Ouch. And then it gets worse when before Blue ends up becoming Nemesis's sidekick, he wants to be a hero just like Imaginary Man and Mac so that way he doesn't lose Mac. Unfortunately, Blue fails, and while he falls from a balcony and could have seriously gotten hurt, Mac runs off to Imaginary Man asking if he's okay because he has a flower stuck to his face. Which, to be fair, is his kryptonite, but still. And then he proceeds to brutally chew out Blue.
You ruined everything! But Mac, Look, next time you're feeling super and heroic, remember who the real superheroes are and butt out!
Yeah, you heard that. Mac abandons Blue in cold blood.
To those who say that Blue's the only real jerk in Foster's, I know it's just for this episode, but come on. Blue didn't do anything wrong here aside from just being kinda selfish. But hey, it all works out in the end, doesn't it?
Yeah, it all does work out in the end. And it should also be noted that despite all of the things that Blue has done across the show, he has not once abandoned Mac. ever. So when Mac's lowest point in the whole show is abandoning Blue, that's when you know things are getting real. And it makes it all the more sweet when Mac genuinely apologizes to Blue after he realizes what he did. Consider, as I've talked about previously, that nobody else ever apologizes to Blue aside from that one time under pretense. So Mac giving Blue a genuine apology for the worst thing he ever did to him? That just hits me right in the feels in the best way possible.
Going back to A Fairweather Friends, remember that one? I just mentioned it about 30 seconds ago. This one also has a lot of subtle touches like the aforementioned Eduardo gag, Mac's catchphrases all being from 70s and 60s cartoons, Blue not actually designing a clubhouse but a mansion. There's a bunch of fun things here that help elevate this above just another superhero Saturday morning cartoon parody, and no wonder this was one of my favorite episodes as a kid. It's great! It was just about to get into A tier, but honestly, A tier got a little too crowded, so sorry Super Friends, but hey, you get to lead B tier, so good for you. Speaking of which, on to A tier with number 27, The Trouble with Scribbles. We've seen what happens when kids and teenagers make imaginary friends, but what about babies? Babies whose minds aren't quite developed enough yet to make cohesive thoughts or legitimate imaginary friends. Well, they make scribbles. Scribbles are these weird, crinkled up balls of pure imagination that, at first, seem uncontrollable, but when given the chance to explore the house and be themselves, even if they can be a little bit like a hive mind, they turn out to be quite helpful. So helpful, in fact, that they ruin Foster's, albeit not in the way that Frankie and Harriman originally thought. They thought that letting the scribbles run crazy throughout the house would destroy it, as in break it down, but no, they end up being very helpful servants and make everybody in Foster's lazy and unproductive. It's only when they all get adopted do things turn out okay.
I think out of all of the season 1 episodes, this one comes off as really sweet to me in the Blue department. Mainly because when Blue meets the Scribbles after finally opening the secret door for himself, he's the only person in the whole house who immediately forms a genuine bond with them. Even when they overload the house, he makes it clear that he loves having the Scribbles around.
I mean, what's the big deal anyways? These guys are great! Aren't you my little scribble friend?
I just think it's adorable. And later on, when Mac is able to convince everybody that the Scribbles can be helpful around the house, Blue understands the Scribbles better than anybody else, to the point where he calms one down after it has a meltdown because of Frankie giving it too many tasks, and outright explaining to Frankie how she's supposed to handle them. And it all culminates in that beautiful ending where all the Scribbles get adopted except for one. The one that blows raspberries, Blue's favorite. And they play together, and it's just so cute and sweet, and I love it!
Those moments are sweet, yeah, but I like how, just like Bye Bye Nerdy, this episode is able to get so much done in only 22 minutes, although this time, there's not as much story going on here, so instead, it's joke after joke after joke. All of them being surrounded by a really clever concept that I'm surprised they addressed as early as they did. Let's face it, the concept of The Trouble with Scribbles sounds more like a season 3 or 4 episode, something that maybe they would develop after getting fan letters or seeing some online discussion boards, but no, they jump right into the imagination right away. It's got that typical season 1 Foster's laid-back stay-at-home vibe, but all the characters are on point, the situations are fun, and yes, like V said, it can get a little sweet.
Although let's just be clear, I am grateful that they never explored what adult imaginary friends are like.
Yeah, no. Number 26, Blue Done It. Maybe it's the mystery fan in me, I don't know, I just love this one, from beginning to end. Uncle Blob, Uncle Blob, which one of these characters came first? This can't be a coincidence. Look, come on, tell me I'm not the only one who sees it. Anyways, Uncle Pockets, the most popular imaginary friend in history, comes back to Foster's. And while everybody thinks he's so great, Blue has a certain feeling that there's a trick under Uncle Pockets' sleeve, or I guess in one of his pockets. So Blue has to figure out what's going on, all while Uncle Pockets has to shut him down. Or that's at least how Blue thinks it's going. In actuality, Blue's accomplishing a whole lot of nothing, while everybody else is going about their day. What I like most about Blue Done It is that it legitimately is a mystery. It's not one of those things where they pull the rug out from under you, or where you rewatch the episode and you know the ending, it's totally cheap because the episode doesn't lead into what happens. No, sometimes in this episode, you really do wonder, is Blue right? Is Uncle Pockets actually some kind of crazy maniac? In the end, Blue is right that Uncle Pockets has a secret. It's just something far more wholesome and in no way sinister. Of course, Blue's trying to do this so that he can be as loved as Uncle Pockets is and take the popular guy down a peg, so to speak. And yeah, you can kind of debate whether or not that's justified. I know V's gonna have a lot to say about that. But for me, it's the story that really sells the show. Yes, it's funny. Yes, the Uncle Pockets song is great. But that mystery, man, it just hooks me every time, even though I totally know what's gonna happen. That's the sign of good writing right there.
And you know what? I'm the same way. It surprised me watching Blue done it for the first time in a few years since I first watched it. I remembered exactly what was going to happen, but I was still sucked in. And then there's this one scene where Mac is trying to help Blue find out what Uncle Pockets is hiding, and Uncle Pockets himself intercepts the phone call and cuts it off before Mac can tell Blue what he found. And then he looms over Blue sinisterly, and I audibly gasped, even though I knew Blue was not in any danger whatsoever. But still, I think that really helps convey just how good the writing is in this episode. I do think for the most part, Blue's jealousy isn't actively harming others, so I don't really hold it against him, aside from the few times he's actively trying to slander Uncle Pockets instead of discover the truth. But I will say, I can't help but feel a little bit bad for him in the ending, because after the secret is revealed that Uncle Pockets keeps a keepsake from all of his previous kids, as everybody celebrates him as the greatest imaginary friend ever, and Blue is futile in trying to get some of that praise for himself, it starts off all standard-ish, like, haha, Blue just wants attention. But then there's a brief moment where he says, "Come on, love me too!" And for that brief moment, you can actually see some of his vulnerable side coming out, because as we'll cover in House of Blues, Blue did not have the best beginning at Foster's, and he was put at a major disadvantage compared to a lot of other people. So we see that his jealousy from Uncle Pockets stems from how he gets all the love that he himself never got. And I do think for a brief moment, that's actually kind of heartbreaking.
It is, yeah, but still, I wouldn't want to reward the kind of behavior he showed in this episode, but hey, to each their own, right?
Yeah, of course. I'm not saying he should be rewarded for his bad behavior. I'm just saying that I understand where he's coming from, and I feel bad for him. Nothing wrong with that, right?
Of course not, no. Number 25. Dinner is swerved. At the Foster's house, Mr. Harriman is a stickler for rules. Who would have guessed? So nobody's allowed to eat dinner until everybody's at the table. Unfortunately, Blue's still pretty new to Foster's and gets himself lost. Along with Mac, of course, who needs to get home. So it's up to Wilt, Eduardo, and Coco to track them down, all while they're trying to find their own way back, and Mac and Blue keep getting lost and meeting food friends, and Madam Foster's helping Frankie sneak food to the other friends. There's a lot going on, but it all works really well. Every plot line is given just enough focus to make it funny, but it's not given too much focus to where the joke gets old. Cause let's face it, what's going on here with Mac, Blue, Eduardo, Coco, Mr. Harriman, it's all the same joke over and over. But because it's so varied and each plot keeps building and building, and especially since they all have satisfying endings, I just can't help but laugh every time. It's simple yet complex, and you know that with that contradiction, it's gotta be good.
I ultimately think that Dinner is Swerve's biggest strength is Mac and Blue. They start at the beginning with Blue trying to show Mac the appreciation in the mundane, and then it spirals further and further, where Blue's coming up with plans to get them back to the dinner table, but nothing works because Wilt, Ed, and Coco are thwarting them. And most importantly, they really shine a good light on their bond. A lot of their interactions remind me of how brothers would behave, which is funny considering Mac already has an older brother, so I guess you could say Blue is the healthy variant of what Terrence should have been.
Yeah, there's no way that Mac's gonna have these kinds of adventures with Terrence, at least with both of his arms still on.
But yeah, it's episodes like these that prove that Mac and Blue's bond really is the heart of the show, and that's ultimately what I think makes it shine the best.
There's also a lot of creative aspects here, like all the ways that Madam Foster sneaks food to the other friends, or how food friends never go down to eat dinner because they too could end up being dinner. Like I said before, it builds and builds and builds, and it's more than deserving of its spot here in A tier. Number 24, Worldwide Wabbit. What could have been, what could have been. I'm not saying that about the episode itself. I think it's rather well done. But man, so many missed opportunities that could have followed. What happens is that Mac and Blue catch Mr. Harriman singing an embarrassing, quote-unquote, song to Madame Foster that he used to sing to her when she was little. Eventually, the whole house and then the whole world finds out about it, and Mr. Harriman, the stick-in-the-mud, no-nonsense man that he is, becomes the laughingstock of the planet. Mr. Harriman has to deal with the embarrassment, kind of get revenge, he doesn't really succeed, and cope with the fact that people are laughing at him for something that he thought was a genuine gesture to Madame Foster. Like most episodes in the show, this one's really funny, but this is one of the few, in fact, I maybe even would say the only time, we get a full character focus on Mr. Harriman. The closest we get to after this is setting a precedent, but even then, it's nowhere close to this. Mr. Harriman puts aside his pride to make his creator happy. This is something we rarely ever get to see in the show. For the most part, Harriman serves as an antagonist. While not necessarily a bad guy, his ideals and morals gradually become more and more at odds with Mac and Blue's. So here we get to see a soft side that we didn't see before or really since. One of the biggest complaints that both of us have about this show is that Mr. Harriman is the only main character who doesn't grow or change throughout the series. Sure, he has that little bit of a redemption in Destination Imagination, but since it's not the finale, it doesn't get to stick. And even then, if it was gonna be the finale, then he just goes from point A to point B in one 44-minute special. The episodes don't follow up on Harriman's development, which in a sense can make Worldwide Wabbit a little frustrating, but personally, I like to see the episode for what it really is. A glimpse into a rare side of Mr. Harriman that shows that, deep down, he's not such a bad guy after all. In fact, if he let his hair down, he might be a pretty fun guy.
I don't think I could have said any of this any better. I still very much enjoy Worldwide Wabbit, even when you put aside what could have been for Mr. Harriman. Which Trevor said, and I have definitely said before, it really is a shame that this is one of the only times we get to see beneath Harriman's stickler attitude, because if it wasn't for this, setting a precedent, and even the ending of Destination Imagination, it really does seem like the show is trying to hammer in that Harriman really does not have any empathy whatsoever, and he prioritizes his rules over the safety and well-being of everybody in the house. But going back to the episode itself, I also really like how they utilize Blue and Frankie's friendship. The episode shines a light on how both of them seem to be personally victimized by Mr. Harriman, and that's where they end up bonding a little. After all, when Mac accidentally films the video, Blue's first instinct is to show Frankie, and I think that's really sweet. It's also really awesome to see both of them scheming together to humiliate Mr. Harriman behind him and Mac's back. It's a side of their dynamic that I feel like we don't really get that much in the show, and it really is a shame because it's really nice to see Frankie be a big sister to Blue just like she is with Mac.
I said it before and I'll say it again. What could have been, what could have been. Number 23. My so-called wife. This is another copy and paste here where we're gonna take the things that we just said about Dinner is Swerved and paste it here. Only this time it's much bigger. And one of the things that, in my opinion, helps set My So-Called Wife apart is this weird, not exactly donor guy. He just gets crazier and crazier throughout the whole episode. And then that ending, I am not gonna spoil it, but it gets me every time. Oh, and also that ending with Harriman's great too. I know we've talked a lot about Foster's having some bad endings here and there, but this one more than makes up for it. Well, I guess I should probably say what this episode's about. Mr. Harriman's trying to get funding from this normal, sane man who doesn't really get the whole concept of a home for imaginary friends. He sees Harriman and Coco in a compromising position and suddenly thinks that they're married. Cause I guess imaginary friends can get married? Is that a thing?
I mean, probably, but only to each other.
Mr. Harriman has to teach Coco to be civilized when they go to a charity event, and Mac and Blue go as well to keep Harriman stuck to his word after he promised that he'd give them 2 jet cars. Mac has to teach Blue how to be sarcastic. The crazy, normal guy puts them through a whole bunch of challenges and competitions that only get worse and worse. Like I said, it keeps building, it's a lot of fun, and those endings, both of them, they are just great.
Oh, absolutely. And let me tell you, I was one of those kids who had to learn what sarcasm was, so I definitely relate to Blue's part of the plot. Although I don't think I was naturally sarcastic, I was just plain naive or something, but the point still stands.
This is another episode that shows that Coco can be a really strong character when she's given some focus. Much like in Mondo Coco, while she may not be able to speak, she's able to convey her personality to the audience quite well. And in fact, she's fun, lovable, and someone I wish that the show gave a little bit more attention to. Maybe if the show went on a little longer... Actually, judging by Season 6, that might not be the best thing to wish for. So all I'll say is, it's about time we got some more Coco stuff. Number 22. Race for Your Life, Mac and Blue. This is the episode with 2 endings, and that's all I knew about it until I was like 14 and just happened to see it on Boomerang or something. Yeah, I know, I missed it in the original airing. Oh well, what are you gonna do, sue me?
Race for Your Life, Mac and Blue is pretty much self-explanatory. Blue is tired of always getting second place to Mac in whatever game that they play, so he challenges Mac to a race from the Beehive Arcade all the way back to Foster's. It's yet another one of those episodes where it starts simple, but then it just spirals out of control, but in the best way possible. Because Mac at first is thinking of not even competing and letting Blue win, but he then realizes that Blue's going to hold bragging rights over him if he wins, so he's determined to beat him, but he wants to do it fairly while Blue isn't afraid to play dirty. It culminates into one of 2 endings. So to explain a little more, because I know for sure I also didn't know that this episode had 2 endings until a few years ago, but basically, people who watched Foster's were supposed to go on the Cartoon Network website and play Big Shot Checkers, choosing either Mac or Blue and voting which one would win the race. This results in 2 endings, which surprisingly are pretty equal to each other. I don't even know which one I prefer, because in the Mac wins ending, you get this really nice moment of Blue asking Mac if he's okay the minute he passes out, and then waiting for him to wake up in his hospital bed. But for the Blue ending, you get a satisfying conclusion to the whole how do these shoes work joke when they fall on Blue's hands and suddenly he's running to the finish line on his hands using Mac's sneakers. So really, no matter what you still get a really fun episode.
I do like the idea of the 2 endings. I just don't like that it's kind of a cop-out, I guess we'll never know sort of thing. I don't know, I always hated when shows did that, especially when they had a competition where you could vote. Now, I didn't see the original premiere, but I did vote. And when I asked kids at school the next day who won, nobody knew. Granted, it's obvious who wins in each ending, but still, yeah, it is kinda cheap. What I also will say is that this episode has this grand adventure going with a lot going on. It's like a kid-friendly, smaller-scale version of Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. The only other downside I can say is that sometimes the humor can be a little, bad. This is mostly in the case of that old guy joke that just will not stop. But that's really the only joke that majorly bombs. And the rest of the sense of adventure and scope of this whole thing more than makes up for it, which is probably why it's so high. Number 21. Hickey Burp.
In this episode, Mac is tired of his classmate, Richie Wildebrat, bragging about how Blake Superior, his imaginary friend, is the best imaginary friend in the whole world, and Richie, of course, has a superiority complex altogether because he's gotta be better than everybody. So Mac decides to ask for Blue's help in taking him down by competing against Blake Superior in this talent show that Foster's Home is throwing. However, in a shocking turn of events, Blue says no. But considering what he went through in the Sweet Stench of Success, I fully understand. But what ultimately gets him to change his mind is when he eats too many chips and drinks too much soda, and suddenly he gets the hiccups for the very first time in his life. He gets made fun of by Richie and Blake, so he decides to enroll in the talent show, using hiccups as his talent just to stick it to the man. I have to say, this episode is just plain fun. I'm not necessarily sure if I'd say it's funny, but it sure does make me smile. I think it's adorable how genuinely joyous Blue is when he gets the hiccups for the first time, describing them as little surprises that always pop up when you least expect them. That's actually really nice. And of course, we also get a few good moments between Mac and Blue, especially that hug after Blue and Blake's fight. That's just really wholesome. And of course, Blue and Blake fighting each other because Blake decides to combat Blue by making burps his talent, results in this really, really creative fight between them, where it's not like they're actually fighting each other, but the way it's choreographed, it's just, that's the great stuff right there.
This'll be the last time I do this, I promise. Ditto. I mean, what else can I add to that? You don't mind if I copy your homework, do you?
Sure, but try to make it look different enough.
Okay, so I'll just say it in Cantonese. Number 20. Store Wars. Foster's is one of the few shows that, from the pilot on, it gets it right. Now, there are some shows like Drawn Together that take a couple episodes, specifically 2, to find their footing and get good. Sometimes, in the case of, say, Bob's Burgers, it's good right off the bat, but you can tell they're still trying to see what exactly they want the show to be. But Foster's? That didn't happen. It was the same show from beginning to end of season 5.
I'd argue end of season 4, but go on.
It's Madam Foster's birthday, and Frankie brings some of the friends out to the mall to get her a gift. This is another one like My So-Called Wife or Dinner is Swerved, where there's about 100 things going on here. Wilt's holding the door for everybody, Frankie's trying to wrangle the group, Eduardo gets lost, Coco gets several jobs, Mac is chasing down Blue while Blue is trying to get a gift for Madam Foster with next to no money. And then of course, as the meme would dictate, everybody in the mall is a rip-off artist and deserves to get kicked in the shins.
Classic running gag.
I guess it's my turn to be a Blue apologist for once. People point to several moments in this episode and say, "See, look at this! Blue is the most evil person in the world! He's greedy and wants money! He's kicking people in the shins! He ripped a seat out of a bus!" Oh yeah, so evil. Not at all something like an idealistic young kid would do. Yeah, I think people are kinda overthinking this one. And hey, he's treated as a nuisance anyways. It's not like the episode's trying to justify what he does. I don't see a problem. Especially when it leads to so many good jokes. I don't think there's a bad one in this entire episode. It's just A material all throughout, which is probably why it's here in A tier. I also like that, with the exception of Wilt, who's kinda stuck at the door, unable to do anything, the characters get an equal amount of focus. Sure, Coco disappears through the halfway point, but she comes back in the end, and she did get a lot of focus in the first act. And this is important because, even though it wasn't intended to be the first episode after the pilot, it was. So this episode needed to outline some of the characters and what they would go on to be. The only ones we don't get a whole lot of are Madam Foster and Mr. Harriman, but we would get more of them in a little bit of time, and Star Wars is already so jam-packed, I'm not sure what else you could add.
You know, it's funny how you point out a lot of people detracting from Blue in this episode specifically, because I very much remember 2 YouTubers, one who I used to watch and one who I sometimes still watch, using this one clip to make Blue look like a bad person.
How much you got?
I got a 5.
Gimme!
I've spoken out about this before, but this is one of the worst choices they could have picked. Out of context, sure, it looks like he's being greedy. But in context, he's pooling everybody's money together to buy a gift for Madam Foster, and they're aware of it.
Coco wants to buy something for Madam Foster too.
So if you're going to try to make Blue look like a bad person, use examples that actually work in context, please and thank you. But anyway, I think it's funny how early on the show already established that Blue would be my favorite character. Sure, I started with Squeakerbox, technically, but when I binged the whole show, Star Wars had me laughing at pretty much every single Blue scene. Every time he called somebody a ripoff artist and kicked them in the shin, the moment where he pleads with Frankie and he says, "Ladies can't resist the pearly whites." And of course, that scene where he sees the dancing cacti and he goes,
Yep, those Cartoon Network Yes era promos have burned that into my memory. Thanks for bringing that back.
That's the fucking thing to...
Although this particular line's a lot funnier in hindsight when you know just how much more chaotic Blue becomes later on.
No one's allowed in the mall without money. It's the law.
So yeah, that's Star Wars. What do you want me to say? Segment's over.
Moving right along.
Number 19, Emancipation Complication.
While Mac's at school, he notices that one of his classmates is using his imaginary friend, a pencil that looks a lot like Abraham Lincoln, to cheat on a test. Naturally, the teacher decides to confiscate the imaginary friend and the imaginary friend's au pair, Moose, throwing them into the closet. Oh boy, now what does this remind me of? But in this scenario, everybody recognizes that it's the wrong thing to do, so Mac sneaks Blue into class, he helps him sneak the imaginary pen and his au pair into Foster's, and they find out that despite Foster's being overcrowded at the moment, Madam Foster still wants to take them in because, well, it's the right thing to do. Unfortunately, Honest Abe Lincoln Pen is not so honest after all. And the next thing you know, he and Moose are conspiring to sell all of the imaginary friends for profit, and Frankie tries to expose them, but to no avail, and eventually Abe Lincoln Pen is busted. This episode's pretty fun all around, and in a way, it kind of reminds me of Everyone Knows It's Bendy, but slightly remixed and so much better. This is near exactly what I could see a 30-minute version of Everyone Knows It's Bendy being like. You've got the imaginary friends who seemingly do no wrong, but turns out they're evil and they're causing problems for everybody. And in the end, they get their just desserts. Weirdly enough, even though Blue is out of the picture for most of this episode because he's obsessed with this old school game that he found in the closet, we do get what I consider to be one of his best moments overall. When you look at Blue, you see a 2'0" blob, probably not capable of doing many things. But then in this episode, when his game is almost dead and he needs to get batteries, but he ends up locked out of the house somehow, he kicks down the main door of Foster's and rips the closet door off its hinges within seconds with barely any struggle. I think that's amazing. Like, I can't believe that Mac imagined an imaginary friend who's so small but packs a big punch, yet we barely get to see it throughout the entire show.
I think what makes this episode as good as it is would be the villain. Abraham Lincoln Penn is one of the first, and perhaps one of the only legitimate threats that the Foster's gang has faced. He's legitimately trying to ruin people's lives for money. That automatically raises the stakes. And there's also a lot of fun in the third act where they have to take the house back, and Mr. Harriman's forced to be Abraham Lincoln's servant. Plus, as a history fan, I gotta love how Abraham Lincoln Penn is doing the exact opposite things that the real Abraham Lincoln would do. He's selling all the friends into slavery, he constantly lies and cheats, and at the end of the day, he doesn't win. Good on you, Fosters. You really know how to make me smile. Number 18. Infernal Slumber. Mac has a sleepover with all of his friends at his apartment. Only problem is, he didn't know this would happen. And in fact, he doesn't want it to happen. Even so, Blue, Eduardo, Wilt, Coco, Goo, and Cheese still show up and cause a lot of havoc. Mac's mom can't be woken up, and if Terrence sees what's going on, terrible things will happen. So it's all about the gang trying to have a good time, except for Mac, he's still not really into it. All without waking the evil that lurks in the other rooms. With the exception of Cheese, I love everyone's dynamics. We get to see a ton of banter, strange situations that can only happen at a really weird slumber party. It all works really well, except, again, I just don't think Cheese is very funny, and I don't think he adds a whole lot here, especially since the reactions to him are very muted, which means that, once again, much like the Big Cheese, the joke is, haha, Cheese thinks that a smoothie is chocolate milk. Luckily, he doesn't get a whole lot of focus in this episode, so for me it doesn't really weigh it down. The rest is still a lot of fun with great character moments, and hey, we get to see more of Terrence being a threat. Which, now that I'm thinking of it, despite being featured prominently in House of Blues, Terrence kinda disappears from the latter half of the show, doesn't he?
Yeah, blame Terrence's voice being a strain on Tara Strong's throat for that.
They couldn't have just changed the voice? They did it for Blue.
What?
Yeah, if you listen from the beginning of the show to the end, he sounds quite different. It's not a totally different voice, because it is still the same guy. I'd say it's kinda like the transformation that Owen's voice went through in Total Drama. It started off as more of a down-to-earth, quote-unquote, realistic voice, and then became a lot more exaggerated and cartoony as time went on. Maybe they could have done the same for Terrence.
Okay, yeah, now I know what you're talking about, but I guess we'll never know. Infernal Slumber is one of those weird episodes where, when you think about the characters involved, this plot should not have happened whatsoever. But if you're willing to suspend your disbelief just enough to get into it, you'll end up having a really fun time. It's nice seeing how every character kind of has their own thing to do. Blue's the one orchestrating the whole thing, Mac's the one trying to make sure nobody gets caught, Wilt's cleaning up around the house, Eduardo is trying to take pictures for memories, Goo and Coco show up because it's a boys-only slumber party, but they want to come too, and Cheese is just kinda there. But it's a good thing he is, because he is helpful to the plot near the end.
Quiet, doggy!
It's weird how something that should normally be really quiet quickly devolves into chaos, and I am all for it. I also think it's really funny how when Goo first shows up, Blue does not want her around whatsoever, and then they start arguing because she calls them a bunch of girls because they don't know how to have a fun sleepover. And then literally, split second, Blue goes from being mad at Goo to immediately being on board with whatever she wants to do. That's just hilarious. Although I think the scene that takes the cake for comedy is when Terrence wakes up and realizes what's going on. Mac tells him that he's having a bad dream, and then suddenly everybody improvs weird things like Eduardo pretending to be a clock, Wilt doing the worm, Cheese being cheese, and the chaos really gets built upon the best here. Especially when you get to Blue, who gets a log out of nowhere and just suddenly starts speaking backwards. That's crazy. We love to see it.
Number 17, Eddie Monster. Eduardo falls in line with Terrence and his friends, who have this, I guess, imaginary friend dogfighting ring where they put Extremosauruses against each other, and Eddie goes along with Terrence. And, yeah, everything you can imagine that's going to happen does happen. This is one of the few times where Terrence gets to be an actual antagonist. There are episodes like Seeing Red where he causes the conflict, I guess, but he doesn't factor into the episode as a whole. There's episodes like A Lost Class where he's more of a nuisance than anything else. Like we mentioned in the last episode, Terrence disappears later on in the show, so we don't get to see very many episodes like this. I'd say for me, if we had more episodes like Eddie Monster, this one would be, I'd say, around mid-B tier. It's just that we finally get to see one of the things that House of Blues was building up on come true at long last.
Conceptually speaking, Eddie Monster could have been a really good episode to solidify Ed's arc of becoming braver. After all, the only reason he runs off to be with Terrence is because his friends all think he's a scaredy cat. Blue specifically goes really far with it, but at the same time, nobody disagrees. So even though he's really harsh about it, he's not wrong. But as you can probably see in the rest of the episodes, Eduardo is still kinda cowardly, so it is a shame that this didn't close off his character arc, but at least we got something marginally better. But back to the episode itself. Honestly, I don't really have that much to say about this one. It's got a couple of funny scenes, it's nice seeing Pikachu be the ultimate Extremosaur, it's awesome seeing Eduardo be brave for his friends, although I could absolutely do without Wilt slapping Blue across the face.
Oh, you're adults! Stop it!
As V pointed out, it's great to see some of Eduardo's character development, it's fun to see a lot of action mixed with comedy, and the group dynamic is quite strong. Though it's not the strongest it's ever gonna be, we still have some pretty big episodes to talk about in S tier, one in particular. But enough about Eddie Monster. On to number 16, Cookie Dough. Blue is so evil, guys. Yeah, look how nasty he is in that super sincere apology he gives at the end. He's faking it. He's faking it, guys. Be mad. Yeah, I can easily see this being one of those episodes where all those mid-2000s reviewers get all angry because Blue's so villainous, or whatever you want to call him. But hey, it's this behavior that gives us this awesome episode, so I'm not gonna complain. Foster's roof is leaking, so Blue decides to sell lemonade in an ice-cold rainstorm. And when that doesn't work, Madam Foster sells her homemade cookies that she makes once a year. Blue makes bank off selling these, buys the recipe, and proceeds to go full Onceler and biggering the company while driving the rest of the Foster's gang ragged. The reason why I said I can easily see people hating this episode is because, mainly, the jokes just come from Blue being evil. He treats his workers terribly, he's spoiled, he's rich, he's not caring about the customer. But it's just how far he goes with this and just how out of touch he is that makes it so funny. And hey, if you're worried about mean-spirited stuff, like I said, he's got that super sincere apology at the end. This has got to be one of the most heartfelt moments in any episode of the show, including the specials.
I will say, the apology is nowhere near as good as a Fairweather Friends, but you still get Blue calling himself
I'm a one-celled paramecium, but worse! I'm like a zero-celled paramecium. A zero-celled paramecium who's ugly and smelly and mean to his friends.
But of course, the funniest part about this episode is Frankie going nuts. She grew up with Madam Foster's cookies, and they're so good that she could never get enough. But now that they're being made 24/7, 365, she can eat all she wants, and boy does she lose her mind. Heroine's got nothing on this. And this is probably somebody's fetish, isn't it? Well, episode ruined. Now it's an F tier.
Really, there's not much else that I can add to this. Cookie Dough is really fun. It may be Blue's lowest point of season 2, but it's still funny. You've got the humor that comes from Blue being out of touch, and then of course you've got the scene where Blue is trying to run the business all by himself, and everything goes downhill right away. I still can't believe that he's so bad at cooking that he gets sucked up by the whisks, even though he was nowhere near the batter. That's how terrible he is. Though you gotta admit, like it or not, he spits bars.
And delivered to me in a box of the finest cardboard extracted from the baobab tree found only in the jungles of Zanzibar Island.
Cookie Dough, it's funny, it's got some good heart, it's got Frankie losing her mind,
and it's the most mean-spirited thing I've ever seen, and I'm gonna find the writers, and I'm gonna—
Number 15, Setting a President.
Ooh boy, the opening already reestablishes what I already think about Mr. Harriman. He's overworking Frankie and the imaginary friends. He prioritizes his rules and schedules so much that he doesn't even care about the well-being of the imaginary friends. And Frankie has had enough. So she decides to run against Harriman in a presidential election. Blue wants to get in on it as well because, of course, he's blue. Although his Abraham Lincoln getup does seem to foreshadow the events of Emancipation Complication. But I digress. Setting a president does quite a bit all at once, but they somehow make you feel sympathetic for everybody. You've got Frankie who's running for president because she genuinely wants to make things better, and then you later find out that Mr. Harriman is trying to secure his role because that's all he knows how to do. It's basically part of his identity, even if he can be pretty terrible. And of course you see where Blue's priorities lie, since he drops out of the run after forcing Harriman to bribe him in order to help him with his own campaign. And that alone leads to one of my favorite moments in the show, where they're singing their song for the campaign that makes Frankie look absolutely terrible while trying to hype up Harriman as much as possible. Obviously it doesn't work, but it gets me laughing every time.
As someone who used to work in politics, this episode is spot on. We have the old guard establishment type who won't change anything to save his life, even if the system is broken. We have the free thinker who's an outsider in the political scene, and while at first it seems like they're doing a good job, you know that their model is not sustainable whatsoever. And then there's the fringe third-party candidate who, well, he's entertaining. That much can be said. He's definitely not gonna win, though.
I'd still vote for him, though.
I don't know, I'm kind of a Harriman guy myself. And man, that song, that has been stuck in my head for over a decade, and it's never gonna leave. But I don't care, because that is aged like fine wine. That is all campaign ads seem to be anymore.
I have to admit, although Frankie is very well-intentioned with becoming the president of Foster's, I love how ultimately what gets her to step down is that she gets paid less. Madam Foster is really out here forcing her to extend a hand to Mr. Harriman, even though she could never get him to do the same for Frankie. But hey, at least we kind of get to see Harriman in a more sympathetic light, even though, as we've said before, the show goes absolutely nowhere with it, so it's pretty much worthless until Destination Imagination.
And this implies that she only wanted the presidency for power's sake. She's just your average Millard Fillmore, Thomas Dewey, or Al Smith. Ha! I threw a Democrat and a Republican in there so everyone can get mad. Number 14. Bus the Two of Us.
Bus the Two of Us starts with Frankie going around doing errands while Blue tags along because he thought that she was going to take him to Waterworld for some reason. At the end of their trip, Blue discovers that Frankie left the keys in the bus, so he decides to take it out for a joyride, picking up Mac from school and destroying property and getting into an illegal street race with somebody else, causing both of them to get lost. So they call on Wilt and Coco and Goo to keep their cover up so that way nobody knows that they're gone. This episode has one purpose and one purpose only: to make you laugh. And it passes with flying colors. This is my key example whenever I think of a Foster's episode that's literally joke per minute. Like I've described in the beginning, you get one crazy thing going on after another, and while it does take its time to slow down just a little bit, there's still a lot going on, but it's not too much to process, you know? I especially love that one part where Blue gets himself some plungers to use as stilts, so that way he can actually see while driving. And I also love that other part where Mac intimidates Blue into letting him have the wheel, but Blue sits there all smug about it because he knows that Mac has no idea how to drive whatsoever, and he doesn't even need to say anything to make Mac feel more embarrassed than he already is.
Shut up.
This is the Foster's equivalent of chocolate with nuts from SpongeBob, albeit not as funny, I will say, because you really can't get better than that. But in the sense of that it's a rapid-fire series of jokes, and basically all of them land. And they just get weirder and weirder and weirder. No wonder this one aired a whole lot when I was a kid. It's great!
I just wish we could have ranked this a lot higher because of how...
You alright? You okay?
I just wish we could have ranked it a lot higher because of how well it accomplishes what it tries to do.
There's a lot of stiff competition, such as number 13, Mac Daddy. This is how you make cheese. Anyways, Mac wakes up to find cheese in his bed. It's not what you think. Stop doing the internet thing, internet. Mac thinks that he created Cheese in his sleep, and therefore is Blue's brother. Mac and Blue have to hang out with Cheese, and he proves to be, not the most stable imaginary friend, or the smartest, or cleanest, or most fun to be around. He's a pest. And everything that Blue does to get rid of him never seems to work. The dynamic going on here is that Mac's the dad, as the title would say, Blue is the older brother, and Cheese is the little brother that doesn't seem to see eye to eye with his older sibling. And yes, that dynamic is funny, it creates a lot of opportunities for jokes, but I've got to commend this episode for not having Cheese says stupid thing number 375 be the only joke it tells. Instead, the joke is about how the characters react to Cheese doing his strange things. For example, when Cheese says that he likes cereal and he gets more and more intense, Eduardo starts to cower and lose his nerve. Or one of my favorite jokes in the whole show, one that goes on just long enough to get that big belly laugh out of me, is where Cheese is playing with his horse toy and he's making him gallop on top of Blue. You can see Blue slowly get angry little by little, and then, BAM! He explodes.
You're the best kid an imaginary friend could ever have. Will you get that thing away from me?
That's this whole episode, and I'm gonna borrow something that I said in a very old video of mine. That Wayside one I did, what was it, 4 years ago? What's funnier, having Patrick ask Squidward, is mayonnaise an instrument? Or Squidward's deadpan reaction? In my opinion, this is the only Cheese episode that understands that it's the latter, not the former. Idiots are funny on their own, but they're nowhere near as funny without a serious partner to back them up.
While I can't bring up that many more examples that haven't already been provided, I will say a standout is one of the first "I like chocolate milk" bits, which culminates in,
"Can I have some chocolate milk?"
What do I look like, your mother?
Yeah, that one gets me every time.
You know what? You bringing that moment up made me realize something. Another thing that really adds to the joke here with Cheese is the animation. Yeah, he's got some wild takes and some weird movements in other episodes, but it seems like in every shot he's either got an over-exaggerated face, he's drawn off model, he doesn't move correctly. This one seems to go the extra mile. You know what I mean? Please tell me it's not just me.
Yeah, it's probably not just you. Anyways, it is really weird that they kind of established Mac as the dad and Blue and Cheese as brothers, when, as I'll go more into depth with in Good Will Hunting, they kind of seem to establish that Blue is more like the immature but fun-loving older brother to Mac's responsible but still definitely a kid, little brother. So wouldn't it mean that the three of them would be brothers, with the implications being that Mac was so tired of having an older brother that he wanted a younger one for once? But then again, without that, we wouldn't have gotten the amazing title, Mac Daddy. So I guess I can roll with it just this once. Also, I really love the subtle buildup between acts, where you have the different puns with cheese. You've got mac and cheese, blue cheese, and finally, when you discover who Cheese's real creator is...
Jeez Louise!
Yes.
Honestly, it's one of my favorite Foster's endings, period.
I know we've talked a lot about this episode, so I don't want to keep dragging it out. But with you bringing up why Mac wanted to create Blue, and of course in Good Will Hunting, where we find out some of the reasons that some of the main cast was created, why did Louise create Cheese like this? You know, I'm just saying, I wouldn't be surprised if the apartment complex she moved into at the end of the show actually did allow imaginary friends, and in reality it was just the parents being sick of him and wanting to get rid of him.
Honestly, I can see that. That's pretty sad, but also not too sad since it doesn't seem to affect Cheese that much.
I don't think anything does, except for not getting his chocolate milk, which he identifies correctly here, but he doesn't in Infernal Slumber. Okay, we've talked about this one enough. Number 12. Who let the dogs in?
A family tries to drop off a dog at Foster's, only for Frankie to tell them that they house imaginary friends, not pets. Later that night, Eduardo finds the little puppy in a box and decides to take him in because, aw, cute little perrito. Of course he's got to take care of it. Although he's got to keep it really under wraps because Mr. Harriman, being a rabbit and all, has that primal fear of dogs and assumes that every single dog out there is out to get him. But then later on, Mac finds out that Eduardo's puppy, who he's named Chewy, is not the only one of his litter. And he's got a lot of other puppies that they all decide to name in really funny ways because you've got Eduardo doing exclusively Spanish names. You've got Wilt naming some of the puppies after basketball players. You've got Coco, who can only say Cocos, so they're probably all Coco, but spelled differently, like Coco, Coco, Cacao. At least that's how I see it. And then you've got Mac, who gives 2 puppies normal names, Buckaroo and Lucy. But that's actually so much better when you realize that those are the names of Craig and Lauren's dogs, the very ones that inspired the show to begin with. So that's a really sweet shout out to them. But Blue is not having it because he wants to build a time machine with Mac, only for Mac to get distracted by the puppies, and then Mac gets angry at Blue for not playing along with them, which I can see both sides, honestly. Like, on the one hand, Blue should not be taking it out on the puppies and naming one of them stupid, even though that is a really funny scene. But at the same time, Mac had his plans with Blue, and he's just letting the puppies ruin all of their quote-unquote hard work, because Blue's activity that he wanted to do with Mac, that's very important to him. So Mac kind of tossing it to the wayside does sting a lot for Blue, who decides to, in a very strong sense of irony, obey the rules and expose the puppies to Harriman.
Oh, Mr. Harriman.
Even though I did say Mac Daddy has one of the best endings in the entire show, I actually think Who Let the Dogs In has my absolute favorite. Because at the end of the episode, we find out that the puppies are actually not real puppies. They're all imaginary.
Goodbye, Blue. I'll miss you.
The one that Blue named can talk, one of the puppies can turn invisible, Chewie has like werewolf fangs or something, one of them can change colors, one of them has laser eyes, which, let's be real, Foster's home walked so Star versus the Forces of Evil can run. But ultimately what gets me is how Stupid says he always liked Blue the best, and this results in a surprisingly heartwarming moment where Blue absolutely melts like butter on a stove, and he immediately embraces a little puppy, and then they're just playing together and he seems genuinely happy. Also, the way they animated their faces nuzzling has no right being this fluid.
It's too cute! It's disgusting!
The best way I can describe Who Let the Dogs In is wholesome fun. If you want to watch an episode that'll put a smile on your face, this is the one. Whether it's the comedy, whether it's the sweet moments, especially the ending, or some of the camaraderie we have amongst the crew, what's not to love? This is one of the most positive episodes of the show, even though it's one of the few with a blood reference. If I could compare it to another episode, I'd say it's the advanced version, or I guess DLC edition, of The Trouble with Scribbles. I'm not the only one who sees these as kinda similar, am I?
Oh no, not at all. I think there's a reason why these two are my favorites of season 1.
And much like Store Wars, this is another episode that really baffles me that it's in season 1. If she didn't just say that, I would have assumed it was season 3. The characters and tone are so well defined, the plot flows exactly like how a Foster's episode should. Wow, I guess working on the Powerpuff Girls helped Craig McCracken launch a show both effectively and quickly, and also warns you what happens when the show goes downhill. But that's a whole other topic there. Number 11, House of Blues. The very first episode of the show, and it's one of the best. That almost never happens. You got this square-headed kid named Mac who's got an imaginary friend named Blue, and they're the best of friends, but oh no, Mac is all of a sudden too old to have an imaginary friend because it's the law, maybe? So they sent Blue to Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, which is, I'm sure you can tell, a foster home for imaginary friends. It's obviously a pilot movie in that it sets up the characters and the dynamics that would be going on, but it's also a self-contained story about Mac and Blue coping with being separated from each other, Mr. Harriman and Frankie having their constant fights, Duchess being the house menace, Terrence being the major antagonist before he would be removed from the show. Still though, what I like most about House of Blues is that, while it's an amazing pilot that's able to tell you exactly what the show's gonna be, if I'm being honest, if they released this as a movie all by itself, I don't think I'd see any problems. It's a lot like Jimmy Neutron Boy Genius, where it's obviously to set up for the show and everything, but on its own, it's still a really good movie. There are arcs, there's great banter, the jokes are funny, the creativity is on point. I'm honestly surprised Cartoon Network didn't put this in theaters. It certainly would have made Foster's even more successful, though I guess after the Powerpuff Girls movie, absolutely nothing was gonna get a movie. Which is kind of a shame, you know?
Oh yeah, definitely. But House of Blues not being theatrical aside, it does feel very grand scale. It has a very different vibe compared to the rest of the show. Some of the things that they go for are really dark, whether it be literally or tonally. Obviously, since this movie is a three-parter, there is a lot going on. You've got Mac getting Blue to Foster's, you have Blue almost getting adopted, only for Mac to show up at the very last minute, and then you have Terrence and Duchess teaming up to kill Blue, and I am not exaggerating whatsoever. And yeah, considering this is the first Foster's thing ever, they accomplished so much in 90 minutes. Even though Foster's is episodic, I consider House of Blues to be an integral watch for the show. Not only does it properly get you settled in with the lore and how everything works, but also, it provides the biggest point of insight to how I see Blue.
I've been waiting for this one. Turn it up!
So, when Terrence and Duchess abduct Blue and take him to the junkyard, he's being chased down by this huge Extremosaur that's pretty much a demon Pac-Man with spider bomb legs. And earlier in the movie, you see Ed, Wilt, and Coco saving both Mac and Duchess from the Extremosaur while it's in the cage. So when the Extremosaur is out running wild and chasing Blue, this time they chicken out. And sure, this is a natural reaction, but also consider that when Mac throws himself in danger, that instantly gets everybody back on the battlefield.
Eduardo, be a hero!
No, your logo is too scary. Oh, Lord.
So when you think about it, they played favorites in a life or death situation without even meaning to, and they pretty much served as the catalyst to why Blue slowly seems to go downhill as the show goes on. He was left to die when he needed the most, and it was clear that he was never going to be good enough compared to Mac in that regard. So then it leaves him trapped in a negative cycle of sorts where he's kind of like the flowers from Puss in Boots 2. He reacts to his environment. He puts his guard up when they let him down and show that the nature of their double standards leaves him at a strong disadvantage. But then they double down, and then he keeps fighting back, and then everyone else is unaware that they're keeping Blue in a negative feedback loop he can't escape from. And it's all thanks to this episode right here.
Blue treatment stuff aside, House of Blues is mandatory viewing if you're going to make a show. This is a pilot done right. All the characters are figured out, all the storylines are being set up, and in a way that doesn't seem forced or like it's overplaying its hand. It's a solid experience on its own, and knowing that it spawned one of the best Cartoon Network shows of all time, that just makes it even better. Number 10. Duchess of Wales. If the people of Foster's hate Duchess so much, why don't they just kick her out or try to get her adopted? Well, this episode answers that question, and it answers it by saying, nobody can ever win. Duchess is finally adopted by a family who's super happy, loving, and way too clingy. Nothing bothers them or even gets close. Sure enough, they adopt Duchess, and everything seems like it's going well, but as it turns out, they're Mac's next-door neighbors. Duchess's screaming and constant anger is driving his mom to want to move away, so Mac and Blue have to bring Duchess back into the house, all while the Foster's gang is doing everything they can to keep her out.
I think this is a really great episode. Just like House of Blues, you have a focus on Mac's fear of losing Blue forever, and how the two are willing to do anything possible in order to stay together. You've got quite a few funny moments, but you've also got some feels near the end, especially when they think the rest of the Foster's gang is going to keep Duchess away at their expense. And I'll admit, there's a little bit of out-of-character stuff going on here, notably how everybody seems to immediately believe Terrence despite him, oh, I don't know, playing a big part in separating Mac and Blue and almost killing the latter? But hey, even if they're holding the idiot ball for this episode, I still enjoy it.
That third act is one of the most action-packed things I've seen from the show. Only Destination Imagination has topped it. And yes, that means it rivals the third act of House of Blues. This one I think is a little more impressive in the sense that it wasn't a TV movie, so it didn't have a TV movie budget, so they had to do a lot with what little they were given. And I say little, implying that animation is cheap. It's not.
People who do this for a living deserve more credit and respect!
But also, the lead-up to that is just as good. It doesn't have the focus on action, but instead has a focus on banter and dialogue. This is the episode where that famous Singapore/Wisconsin thing comes from, and it's cool to see Duchess be a threat once again. She doesn't show up in the show all that often, but when she does, she's a formidable foe. I do kind of wish we got a little bit more of Duchess in the show, but that would also mean I'd have to look at her, so I guess it could go either way.
Yeah, and I also have to bring up, how come in this episode we have a rule where Duchess is not allowed to get kicked out of the house, but Mr. Harriman had no problem whatsoever immediately threatening Blue to be this perfect little puppet on strings, or else he'll kick him out to the streets? McCracken, explain! Explain! Why wasn't this rule there before?
I don't know, maybe he changed his mind, or maybe it's because Duchess will do terrible things. I don't know. I wouldn't put it past her. She's got strange powers. Political powers! Number 9, Frankie, my dear. Hands down one of the funniest episodes of the whole show. Every single joke in here works, and they keep getting better and better and better. To the point where even when I'm all alone watching the third act, I can't help but burst out laughing. I mean, of course, Orlando Blue is great, but it's also the way that Mac, Blue, and the pizza guy who, I'm sure he has a name, how they all work together to come up with this ruse, and how badly Prince Charming is trying to be a woman. I'm getting ahead of myself, though. What's the story? Mac falls in love with Frankie, and because he knows that Mac wants her, Blue does as well. They fight with each other to win Frankie's heart, accidentally roping in other people along the way, and they go so far as to try to ruin one of Frankie's dates so that she'd fall in love with one of them, only to find out that they were actually doing her a favor, and the guy she was going on a date with wasn't exactly the best one you can find. Like I said, it's constant hilarity and such creative writing and situations. I'd say that I wish we got more just like this, but I guess that means it would make it a little less special. The only thing I don't like about it is that it started the creepy Mac-Frankie thing. No thank you.
You people are gross to me, so very, very gross to me.
Problematic shipping aside, this is a pretty great episode. I'm not sure what else I can add because Trevor really hit the nail on the head here. I love how everything builds up so naturally. You've got Mac having a cute little crush on Frankie because she's so nice, and then you have Blue who just thinks she's hot, and then you have the pizza boy who's into her because she's apparently into him. You've got Prince Charming who falls in love at first sight like a fairy tale, and then seeing them all team up just to create one of the most amazing bits in the whole show, of course that being Orlando Blue. Yeah, that one Tumblr user was not joking when they said it was funnier than most of primetime television at the time. Dare I say it, it's funnier than most primetime television now.
As somebody who has dozens and dozens of tapes that have said primetime that was on at the time, yeah, they're right.
Anyway, it all building up to them ruining Frankie's date, but also helping her dodge a bullet because they expose her boyfriend for being a dirtbag. It's just great, especially when you see Frankie immediately side with Mac and Blue and technically the other two, and then straight up punching him in the face. That was brilliant.
A brilliant ending for an equally brilliant episode. Number 8. Destination Imagination, or as I like to call it, the real Foster's finale. I don't care if the world character was in Goodbye to Blue. I don't care if this wasn't aired last. This is the end.
Destination Imagination very much feels like a finale in every way possible, including it being the last in production order. So basically, Harriman and Frankie's feud rears its ugly head. Frankie is tired of having to do everything around the house with no time for herself, gratitude, or any little smidgen of respect. One day, a chained-up toy box arrives at Foster's, and apparently an imaginary friend is inside it. However, when Frankie tries to open the box, Harriman forbids her to do so because the note says not to open it. Frankie does so behind his back anyway, and discovers that the imaginary friend is World. Literally, he's the entire world of the toy box. Frankie visits every day, and she's pretty much treated like a princess. But then one day, World supposedly keeps her there for longer than she's supposed to, and isn't letting her leave. So, Mac, Blue, Wilt, Eduardo, and Coco have to go into the toy chest and find her.
Much like how House of Blues expertly set up all the dynamics and storylines that be in the show, Destination Imagination wraps them up. Eduardo gets brave, Mr. Harriman decides to let his hair down, not that one, just saying. Frankie finally gets some respect, Blue is Blue, so on and so forth. everything that House of Blues did, this one does just a tiny bit better. The action is slightly better, the characterization is slightly better, and the fact that if this was the finale, this would be one of the best ones there is. It's a satisfying conclusion that you feel was really earned. Everyone ends exactly where they should be, maybe with one or two exceptions. It has that same grand scale that the show had in its pilot, and just like House of Blues, the imagination is on point. This time, even more so, because instead of imaginary beings being in a real world, they're real and imaginary beings being in a fully imaginary world where literally anything can happen. Good, bad, or in between. You can tell they used all their creative energy to make this episode. Everything is so creative, intuitive, and fun to look at. I mean, look at these designs. I could gush about this thing all day, but I've got someone else who needs to speak, so take it away, V.
Thank you, Trevor. Yes, Destination Imagination, in pretty much every way, is the perfect finale, except for two things. So, mainly Frankie, Harriman, and Eduardo get their character arcs wrapped up. Wilt, Coco, and Mac already get theirs wrapped up in previous episodes, so we don't have to worry about them. But there are two characters who I feel should have had a little bit more focus in this as well. For one, Madame Foster, I think, should have been a lot more prominent. Maybe she would be involved in Harriman's story, where the house is pretty much falling apart without Frankie's help, but this time, compared to setting a precedent where she's clearly trying to force Frankie to make amends with Harriman, she's trying to get Harriman to see the value in Frankie for once. Maybe she even hits him with her cane when he says that he's going to give her the pink slip if she doesn't come back. And the second, more important one is Blue. As I said in House of Blues, he's very much stuck in a negative feedback loop that leaves him, in my opinion, deeply traumatized throughout the whole show. And he just gets worse and worse because of what they tend to do to him. So you'd think in Destination Imagination, there would be some resolution for that, but no. It ends with him being in the same place as he was at the beginning of the season, and even gets slapped by Mr. Harriman at the end of the episode.
Ow!
Look how they mess with my boy.
It really feels like Blue's the only one who doesn't get his happy ending, and that makes me really, really sad.
I can't believe you did this to me, God damn it! How could you do this to me?
But aside from that, it's still a really good episode. And I also have to say, with the art direction and the way the plot went and everything, it reminds me so much of Coraline. In fact, World himself is pretty much a good guy version of the other mother, except if the other mother was the other child and he just wanted a friend. And it's even weirder considering Destination Imagination came out mere months before the Coraline movie did. So while it's plausible to assume that the episode got a lot of inspiration from the book, there is no way that it looks so much like the movie at some point, especially when the world itself is falling apart. Like, are Craig McCracken and Neil Gaiman friends or something? I need to know.
And that is Destination Imagination. It's the finale, and you can't convince me otherwise because it's the truth. Number 7. Squeeze the Day. The Foster's gang go to the beach, they leave Blue behind.
Where is everybody?
So now Mac and Blue have the whole house to themselves, and hijinks ensue. Okay, V, I think you've wanted to talk about this one for a while, so here you are.
Thank you very much. Squeeze the Day is absolutely one of my favorite episodes of the whole show. Top 3 material, I'd say. I think what makes this episode shine in particular is how when Mac and Blue are left alone in the house, there is no B-plot. We never cut back to the beach. It's solely focused on Mac and Blue's adventure in the house. And that means we get sole focus on their relationship. I've said it time and time again, but Mac and Blue's relationship is by far the heart of the show. So to see it take sole focus, it's like the episode is calling my name. You've got a lot of funny moments out the wazoo. Most notably, it's hot in Topeka. And then both of the boys losing their minds, running around the house screaming like idiots. I have never watched this episode while it was on TV, so I can only imagine what it was like cutting to commercial break during the first part of the screaming scene, only for them to cut back to them still screaming and running around the house like crazy. You've also got a couple of surprisingly heartfelt moments as well, like when Mac and Blue eat too much food in the kitchen and Mac is pretty much in a food coma, and Blue looks like he's crawling through a battlefield just to reach Mac and tell him that everything is gonna be okay, like a protective older brother of sorts. And you've also got the two of them celebrating when they think that they're finally going to find the elusive Foster's treasure. Really, I could gush about every aspect of Squeeze the Day for an eternity, but I won't because we've still got a few more episodes to go, so the floor is all yours, Trevor.
I think it's good. That's all I really got to say about it. I like Blue impersonating Madam Foster. That was pretty funny, especially just how wrong he gets it. And of course I love those stories of what happens when X and Y characters are left in the main location all on their own. Definitely solid. I wouldn't say it's one of my favorites, but good. Very, very good. That is all. Number 6. The Big Lebowski, or as I like to call it, the playground favorite back in my old elementary school. I can't tell you how many times Paddle Paul, Bowling Paul, or
He is. I did. It should. But it don't.
Has been quoted on that schoolyard, and some say if you still go there late at night, you can hear some of the echoes of young Trevor and his group of miscreants quoting some of the best lines in this episode. Ooh. Much like Frankie, my dear, every single joke is on point. But what I like more about this is that it uses more of the cast to its advantage. It's not just Mac, Blue, Frankie, and a couple other one-offs. This time it's almost everybody, and they're all on their A-game. And personally, I think that this is Blue's paddleball addiction at its funniest, because it shows he's really not good at it. Even though he adores it, he just can never seem to hit that thing once. Except for that one time where he did, but let's not think about that right now. Bowling Paul especially makes this episode because he's teaching Mac all this garbage, and as per the cartoon tropes at the time, you think it's going to work, but nope. Must I repeat myself? He is, I did, he should, but he don't.
Kind of like an anti-Wilt, don't you think?
Oh yeah, for sure. Although I will say they're both charming and friendly people, but whereas Wilt knows what he's doing, Bowling Paul, well, he's Bowling Paul.
Yep, exactly. In a way, it's hilariously ironic that Blue doesn't care about bowling whatsoever, yet he is an absolute natural. Well, no, that's understating it. This dude can hit a strike on every single turn. He is the world's perfect bowler, and yet he cares more about the paddleball, which he can't even hit correctly. But I digress. This episode is a lot of fun, but what makes me like it even more is that it's Craig's love letter to The Big Lebowski, which I guess doesn't say much on its own, but it's extra special when you remember that's his favorite movie. Or at least it was at the time. I don't know if anything's changed for him. So I think that's pretty sweet of him to do.
And now, we're on to the top 5 episodes of the show, according to the consensus. And they belong squarely in S tier. So let's start off with number 5, The Big Picture. As I've stated before, I'm a massive fan of mysteries, so of course this one's gonna make S tier. Sorry, Blue done it. I fought for ya, I really, really did. It's picture day at Foster's, where the whole house gathers together and takes a family picture, kind of. Anyways. Mac and Blue are looking through the old pictures and find that one of them has everybody missing. The only 2 people there are Madam Foster and Frankie. So they're going around the house trying to figure out what happened, how, and why. This has all the strong points of Blue done it, but it gets outdone in one special way. This time, it's not just about the A-plot. There's a bunch of other plots going on at the same time. Wilt's annoyed because, due to his intense height, he never makes it in the picture, so he's trying to come up with other ways where he can finally be seen. Coco thinks that she's gained weight, Madam Foster is forcing Frankie to stand by the stairs all day, Duchess is giving Eduardo a not very effective beauty treatment. The list goes on. Actually, I guess that's not the list goes on, because that's it. Each one of them is funny, interesting, and serves the plot. Especially with that ending where it looks like everybody's finally gonna get their way, and then BAM! Blue messes it all up. Not by being a jerk, but just by someone who got really excited that he figured out the mystery. I might have done the same. And hey, he didn't know that the picture was going on at this time. How was he to know? Though of course I'm sure later on they would have screamed at him and then put him on the electric chair. But this was early on, so Blue gets off scot-free. Great, the Blue apologist thing is contagious. I need to go stop by the pharmacy when I'm done.
Friendly reminder that I am not a Blue apologist.
Call it what you will. I know what it really is. You don't have to hide anything from me. I don't judge.
Oh shoot, I am an apologist. The big picture has a lot going for it, but ultimately what I think elevates it all the way up into S tier is the main plot itself, with Blue and Mac trying to figure out how it all happened. It leads to one of my favorite Blue moments in the entire show.
They were all ready to take it when a galactic overlord came down from space, opened a time vortex, and sucked everybody inside. They were all ready to take it when a galactic overlord came down!
And an extra special thing about this episode is that this is Goo's first appearance since her debut. Go Goo Go happened back in Season 3, while the big picture happens pretty much at the beginning of Season 4. By this point, I feared that I was never going to see Goo again, but guess what? Here she is in all her glory, and Blue is clearly still head over heels for her.
It's Goo!
What's going on? What's happening? What are you up to?
There's not really much about the big picture that I can say that hasn't already been said, but I do love seeing how determined Blue is in trying to solve the mystery and how ultimately his biggest strength in the episode is how he will not stop until he gets the answer he's looking for. And lo and behold, it works in his favor. So yeah, pretty much everybody's satisfied here. Except for everybody in the episode who falls victim to the prank, but hey, that's kind of Frankie's fault for refusing to elaborate. But it's a good thing she didn't, because otherwise there'd be no episode.
Number 4. Blue Super Dude and the Magic Potato of Power. It's a fan favorite for a reason, folks.
This episode sure is a wild ride. Basically, the whole episode centers around Blue telling a really cool story to Mac about this very heroic super dude whose skin happens to be the color blue, and he makes some friends during some travels and helps to protect the Magic Potato of Power, which isn't actually a potato, it's a crystal that's called the Magic Potato of Power. Common misconception there. But you kind of already get the gist of what's going on based on visuals alone. At its core, it's basically Blue telling Mac a simple recap of the day's events before he finally breaks the news to him that he broke his Nintendo DS. But the way that he tells it is so grandiose and larger than life that you just can't help but get suckered into it. And it's a lot of fun seeing how he portrays all of the other characters. It really interests me how, even though Blue tends to make everything all about him, and of course he's the main character of his own story, that doesn't mean that the others are completely dependent on him. He does give Wilt, Ed, and Coco moments in the story where they actually do help. So it goes to show that his ego may not be that big after all.
Oh, to be a fly on the wall for when they came up with this one. It's just wild, like she said. Everyone gets to play their own unique role, and they fit with the characters as well, and the story itself is so fun and engaging that, for me at least, when they cut back to Blue telling the story, I kind of forget that it's not just an episode all by itself. Blue should have told more stories than just the two. I would have loved to have seen these guys again and again and again, and then that's probably it. Too much of a good thing is a bad thing, and we could really use that information today with all those reboots.
Well, before we continue, I do have to say one thing about this episode that's not exactly about the episode itself. Apparently, Craig came up with the Blue Super Dude as a toy first. Since the Blue Super Dude is very obviously modeled after He-Man and other superheroes that were pretty popular in the 80s, he went the extra mile and made the episode solely to pitch the toy that Blue would have wanted. He still has a prototype, but ultimately Cartoon Network said no, which saddens me deeply because I would have gotten my hands on every single Blue Super Dude toy had they existed. Look at these, they look so cool!
And they match the episode they come from. They're fun, they're engaging, and they probably would have attracted more people to the network. Oh well, it is Cartoon Network after all. We can't expect them to make smart decisions. Number 3, Good Wilt Hunting.
It should be no surprise that this is considered by many to be the best special of the show, or at least tied with Destination Imagination. But it's for good reason. Good Wilt Hunting expands more upon the lore of imaginary friends, stuff that we haven't even covered in House of Blues. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Basically what happens is there's a 5-year creator imaginary friend reunion at the house, but Wilt is the only one whose creator never shows up. So we dive into Wilt's backstory and how he was created to be a mentor of sorts to Jordan Michaels, who would go on to be a successful basketball player. One kid got really jealous and created Foul Larry to compete with Wilt. And during their basketball game, Wilt had a chance to shoot the winning shot, but he sees that Jordan is about to get crushed underneath Foul Larry if he doesn't do anything, so he throws the game at the last minute to save his life, but it costs him his arm, his eye, and most importantly, his bond with Jordan. Wilt is so overcome with guilt that he ran away and he hasn't even seen Jordan since. But Jordan also feels guilty about it himself because of, well, you know, he accidentally drove his greatest creation away, and he really does care about Wilt, so it's really sad to see how this unfortunate circumstance ended up tearing them apart for good. At least until Wilt goes to challenge Foul Larry to a rematch, and that's when they finally reunite. But in the meantime, everybody else is left in the dark. Blue is the only one who knows that Wilt ran away, so he tells everybody else, and then he gets ungratefully slapped in the face by Frankie. And then everybody goes to find him, and it's not just Wilt's creator that we see. We also see Ed's creator, Nina, and we see the two scientists who didn't create Coco, but supposedly found her on a deserted island, so I guess they count for something.
This episode made me realize something that none of the others could. I care about these characters. I want to see them have happy lives and conquer their fears or fight their demons, all this stuff, and especially Wilt. Throughout the whole series, Wilt has been kind, giving, always there when you need him. So to see him have a moment of weakness, and to see just how far he would go to make up for quote-unquote what he's done wrong, I can't help but root for the guy. I want to see him happy. Also, I do like the touch that this has been foreshadowed all the way back in House of Blues. When Mac and Blue question Wilt, asking him if he's ever played basketball, he doesn't feel all too comfortable answering the question and just shrugs it off. So that makes me wonder, did they really have this planned from the beginning? Probably. I mean, look at the guy. There's no way he's just imagined like that. And of course, as V said, all the interactions with the other characters in the B-plot are a lot of fun. I love Dexter and Mandark trying to hit on Frankie. I love Blue's increasingly ridiculous theories as to what's going on with Wilt, and them following in Wilt's tracks, seeing that everywhere he goes, even if it's just a little thing, he's changing everybody's lives for the better. But of course, Wilt can't focus on this because he has that one wrong to right. How come Wilt never gets adopted again? As shown in the big picture, he's always there. Wouldn't he be your first pick? Even if you're not a fan of basketball, go Jazz! Wouldn't you want a friend just like this?
I mean, even if you tried, Worldwide Wabbit pretty much proves that he's trying to give that space to somebody else who needs it more than he does. So, it's a matter of him choosing you. But I digress. The main takeaway for me in Good Wilt Hunting is how they talk about the reasons creators make their imaginary friends. Nina talks about how she wanted Eduardo to protect her, but she also needed a play date and someone to help her take care of her baby brother. And subconsciously, the real reason she created him was because she needed someone to teach her to be brave. The same thing applies to Jordan. He created Wilt to help him be better at basketball, but instead, he taught him how to be a better person. And that subconscious reasoning really makes you think. Nothing is ever outright said about Mac's subconscious reason for creating Blue, but as established early on in House of Blues, and as seen in later episodes like Duchess of Wales, Blue tends to echo Terrence a lot, but in a way where it's positive, like when he shouts, when he sees somebody is hurting Mac and is trying to protect him instead of being the one who's actually trying to hurt Mac. At the end of it all, when I think about subconscious reasoning, I really do think that Mac didn't create a best friend. He created a brother. The older brother that Terrence should have been. The one who serves as his only functional family member, and the one who will always protect him no matter what. But hey, that's just a theory. A V theory.
MatPat, please don't sue us. I've seen like 3 of your videos. You owe me, man. Number 2, Make Believe or Not. This is my personal favorite, so I guess I should take the helm for this one. It's yet another day at Foster's where nobody's able to do anything outside, so they decide to do something revolutionary for a house that's full of imaginary friends. Use their imaginations. They're all pretending to be different heroes and villains, and they go on all kinds of crazy adventures, and that would make a pretty good episode on its own. But then Goo, who was taking part in this whole thing and didn't really like how it ended, keeps thinking about their adventures that night and wakes up realizing that she accidentally imagined all the villains they were fighting in real life. So the day before they had to pretend to go on all these crazy quests, but now today, they're really going to do it or they're gonna die trying. I love both halves of these equally. Like, the first half is something I've totally lived through, pretending to be different characters of your own creation or pre-established lore, and seeing what kind of crazy things you can come up with. They've got the person who makes this out-of-place character that doesn't fit in the story. We've got the guy who goes way too far in making himself the best character of them all. We've got the kid who just pretends to be a pre-existing character. We have the person who plays an exaggerated version of themselves. And we have the person who's not really all too into it and is mostly going along with it to keep everybody else happy. And the way they bounce off each other, man, I can tell you, I've had all of these conversations with my friends when I was like 7 or 8. It really takes me back, and it proves that Foster's at its core is best when it's about the group, being exactly that, a group. The banter and the chemistry and the way that they're able to connect with the child audience, it's so refreshing, especially since around this time, sure, there were Cartoon Network shows that were pretty darn great like Class of 3000, but that was made for adults in mind. It spoke to more of an older audience, I guess you could say. This one plays to strengths of both kids that are going through this right now, and also adults who can look back on these memories and laugh. And then the second half is just constant hilarity and fun overall. Seeing how these characters that Goo imagined believe that everything in the game is real life, it's just great, and it builds off of itself again and again and again, ultimately ending with a grand finale of action and laughs. Every single good thing that Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends does is right here. I wouldn't say this should be the first episode you see, that would definitely be House of Blues, but if you're looking for an episode to show off what the show can really do, I'd say Make Believe or Not would be the best choice. At least in my opinion. I know that V wouldn't exactly agree quite to that level, but hey, why have me speak for her when she's right here?
So, Make Believe It or Not may not be in my top 10 of Foster's episodes, but I still think it's a really fun time. The imagination and creativity shows a lot here. And of course, the premise is fun. I mean, aside from maybe fanfiction, I don't think you'll ever find another case of Nicki Minaj teaming up with Jurassic Yoshi and Optimus Prime to take down Speed Racer and Dave the Barbarian. Pretty cool, don't you think?
You had me at Dave the Barbarian.
I thought so. And honestly, with Make Believe It or Not being the last episode that has Goo as a prominent character, it's really nice how you get to see how far she's come since her debut. Because think about it this way. In Go Goo Go, the only person that she really cared about was Mac because he was her only human friend. So even though she did enjoy Blue's company, she pretty much stopped giving him attention the minute Mac came in, which of course to Blue it didn't matter because he's totally in love with her, so... But still, it builds up across season 4 when you see Goo getting along quite well with Cheese, finding a kindred spirit in him, having a really nice friendship with Coco, and finally, this episode is pretty much proof that it doesn't matter if you're human or an imaginary friend to her. She'll still care about you all the same, as we see when Goo does not make the fatal mistake that Blue's friends have made in House of Blues, and she prioritizes his safety just as much as Mac's. So even though it's sad that in season 5 and season 6 she never gets any prominent episodes again, at least this is a really nice way to tie up her journey into a neat little bow.
And if you're wondering what this other person who's with me's favorite episode is, well, look no further than the episode that, by consensus, we've considered to be the #1 episode of Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, Partying is Such Sweet Soiree.
Now this is the one episode of Foster's that I think does every single thing perfectly. So what's the story? Frankie and Madam Foster are going to be out for the day, so they put Harriman in charge of the house. Harriman gives them his word that nothing crazy is going to happen while they're gone, and most importantly, no wild parties. So he makes Blue give his word that he's not going to throw any wild parties behind his back. But obviously Blue isn't going to keep his word because he's the resident troublemaker and everybody is on board with this. The next thing you know, Harriman is out of the house looking for his refrigerator because, you know, is your refrigerator running? Well, you better go and get it. And it turns out that it actually is a refrigerator imaginary friend. So kudos to you, writing team. I did not see that coming. Anyways, the party seems to be going smoothly until Mac reluctantly arrives and accidentally ingests just a little bit of sugar, which proves to go a long way because sugar turns him into a kid-friendly crackhead. He makes a complete mess of everything while Blue for once is trying to calm him down, and it's up to everybody to make sure that the party doesn't get ruined and Madam Foster and Frankie don't come home to a house in ruins. This episode gives every single prominent character their thing to do. Nobody gets left behind. Mac has a sugar rush, Wilt gets involved in an impromptu dance battle, Coco ends up having a relationship with a lamp, Duchess is kind of trying to ruin everything for everybody, but it doesn't work.
It is interfering with my 23 hours of beauty sleep.
You may want to shoot for 24.
Eduardo has his moment where he wants to still be involved with what the group is doing, so he's chasing after them on his tricycle. And Blue, being the ringleader of everything, shows off every single part of his personality here. You get to see him being a wild troublemaker, you get to see how the roles reverse between him and Mac when Mac gets all sugar crazy and Blue has to try to calm him down. You see Blue's cleverness when Harriman comes back and is about to punish Blue, but then Blue reminds him that ultimately it's his responsibility if Madam Foster and Frankie find out about the party.
The house is in shambles, everyone's favorite 8-year-old is off tearing through the town in his birthday suit, and you're gonna have to explain to sweet old Madam Foster how it all happened on your watch.
And while his leadership skills are the most prominent part with him maintaining control over the party, it ultimately shines through when he comes up with the plan to find the runaway Mac. And it all culminates into Blue's big brother side coming out. He sees Mac shivering alone and naked in the alleyway, and he holds back all of his sarcasm. You get a genuine moment where he just puts a blanket on him, softly tells him that he has some gum, lures him back into the car with sugar-free food, and it isn't until they get back into the car that he teases Mac just a little bit, but even that is a lot softer than what he usually goes for with his bombastic energy. So yeah, you've got an amazing balance of character focus, lots of funny moments, and the ending with Madam Foster saying that she didn't want them to throw a wild party because she wanted to be there. You gotta admit, that's a really good twist. It's no wonder why this episode was picked to be reanimated in Foster's Home Reimagined, because really, you can't get any better than this fun adventure that hits all the sweet spots just right.
It always amazes me that this episode wasn't in season 1. I'm not saying it's because it's rough, we've covered that multiple times, but this episode goes so far out of its way to show off every character in their element that, really? This feels like setup. In the best possible way, of course, because it's showing all the fun aspects of the characters, some of their conflicts, some of their quirks. So if they decided to do this in season 1, I think it would have served that purpose quite well. But given that this was the season 2 premiere, I guess it was celebrating that they made it this far or that people liked the show. I don't know, but whatever reason they decided to make it this way, I got to applaud them. Every single thing V says, I agree with. The characters are on point, it's fun, and of course the camaraderie is top notch. Like I said in the previous entry, that's one of the most important things to me in Foster's. And I guess if the best episode can't be Make Believe It or Not, I'd pick the one that does every single thing right. If you want to hear more of what I have to say, just rewind the video, listen to what she had to say, and bam! That's also how I feel too. So yes, that is our list of Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends episodes ranked. But since this was a consensus-based list, if you want to know how we personally would rank these episodes, well, sorry, we're not going to go through the whole catalog for you right here. Instead, we're going to give you our top 10. My top 10 from bottom to top is Setting a President, House of Blues, Frankie My Dear, The Big Lebowski, The Big Picture, Destination Imagination, Good Will Hunting, Partying is Such Sweet Soiree, Blue Super Dude and the Magic Potato of Power, and of course my personal favorite episode of Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, I Only Have Surprise for You. Yeah, all those things I said about Make Believe It or Not, they were lies! I'm kidding, my favorite's Make Believe It or Not. And now V, what's your list?
My top 10 is, from bottom to top, Race for Your Life, Mac and Blue, Who Let the Dogs In, The Trouble with Scribbles, Bus the Two of Us, The Blue Super Dude and the Magic Potato of Power, The Big Cheese, Good Will Hunting, The Big Picture, Squeeze the Day, and as you've probably guessed, Partying is Such Sweet Soiree.
There you go, and if you disagree with us, that of course means you're factually wrong. I'm kidding. If you have your own opinions that differ from ours, please let us know. It's always cool to see how people might like episodes we hate, or hey, even vice versa. Please tell me I'm not alone on the big cheese. Well, folks, thanks for watching the video. What'd you guys think? I think we kind of covered everything we want to know before, so comment below and let us know because we're always excited to hear what you guys have to say. Man, I don't think I've said that since Billy was on the channel.
I can't believe it's already been almost a year.
Yeah, and look how much has changed. For one thing, we've got way more subscribers now. Yes, once again, this was the 40,000 subscribers special, so before we get to the Patreon folks, whom we love very much, I want to shout out a bunch of other people that I love very much. All 40,000 plus of you guys out there who've been cheering us on, watching the videos, and supporting us when we try to do something new. You guys are the best, and we hope there's gonna be more of you coming. Because let's face it, this is already such a good, supportive group, and you guys are always so engaged in the comments, and all the cool things you say always put a smile on my face. You may think I don't notice you, but I do.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. As somebody who's stuck with Media Mementos since the very beginning, it's been amazing watching this channel grow from covering baby blues to making character analyses and the complete history ofs and versus the networks, and getting to see Trevor get the love he deserves.
Thank you very much for that. That was really sweet. And yeah, let me just say, third time's the charm, because I've tried to do like 3 different things here on YouTube. There was my old cringy, terrible phase back on TAS Productions. There was the VeggieTales phase, which kinda ended up burning out. And now there's Media Mementos. We've had some ups and some downs, sure, but I like to think that thanks to your help and support, we've just been getting better and better. And let's hope it stays that way when we hit 50K, right?
Fingers crossed.
Man, I wonder what we're gonna do for the 50... Okay, you know what? Let's cross that bridge when we get to it, okay? And now, it's time to thank our wonderful Patreon people, starting with our Masters of Fate. Chan 11, Drew the Stew, Kev Messick, MD the Dude, Platinum Bass, Quiet Chap, Ryan Williams, Timey, and Woody Woo. And now, our executive producers, Alba Robinson, Blackjack, HR Hoffman, Indiscreet One, Leaf Storm, Ravioli Supremo, Unkale, and who else but Zane. If you two would like your name read at the end of every Media Mementos video, then please consider donating to the channel's Patreon. There's a link in the description below for you to check out. Also, there's a link to the channel's Discord server as well. Feel free to stop on by and say hello. Alright folks, thanks for watching the video, and I'll see you guys next time.
And as always, I'm grateful to have been a part of the channel since Kidmo and still being here 2 years later. Thanks for inviting me to speak again, Trevor. And hey, if you want to listen to me talk more often, why don't you stop by my own channel and say hello? But don't you dare unsubscribe from Media Mementos or else I'll sick cheese on you. Got it? Good.
Okay, bye, doggies.